see the spark in my eye with my sleeplessness, your sleepless caress. And king of all the wild things am I with my sleeplessness, your sleepless caress, your sleepless caress.
Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs. We're broadcasting live on Lost Arts Radio this Saturday, September 26th, 2015. I'm really glad you're here. We've got a pretty neat show tonight. I think you'll like it. And it has to do with quality of food that we're all eating, starting with the first part of the show is about the GMO issue. And I've been following this pretty closely for a long time, quite a few years. And the public is finally getting more and more aware that if you genetically alter the food, it's deadly for the people and animals that eat it. I mean, that it's really not that complex. There's a lot of complexities you can look at, but the issue itself, to be able to figure out if it's brilliant to eat GMO food or not, is really not too difficult. So the public's waking up to some of the deepest truths are often the simplest ones. And so communities and cities and counties and states have been working with their governments, because the governments often just either don't care or they're paid off, apparently, by somebody that wants the GMOs to actually get into the food supply, which is a major crime and should never be allowed. I mean, they're talking about labeling now because they think people would not buy the GMOs so much if it says genetically engineered on the package, which I think is probably true. That's happening in Europe, and it makes it much less worthwhile, or not worthwhile at all, for the GMO fake food producers to put it out and pay all their fake scientists to make believe that it's edible and that sort of thing. So the labeling movement has been important in that way, even though, in my opinion, it should be banned from the planet immediately if humans still had common sense. That would be so obvious. But to be realistic and have a strategy that works, the labeling movement has been a very powerful idea, because as it gets labeled, people don't buy it so much, even if they're really not sure why. They're just suspicious, and so they tend not to buy it, the food that's labeled with GMO ingredients. And obviously the biotech companies totally agree with that, because they spend tens of millions of dollars to avoid GMOs being labeled. So now what they're doing in addition is spending even more money to buy off the congressmen and give them fake information about how scientific GMOs are and how they're going to save the world from starvation, even though they're actually going to do the opposite. And it's a pretty intense fight at the moment. But what Jeffrey brings, in addition to this vast experience in the whole movement and being one of the top educators about GMOs in the world, who's written some great books and is about to come out with a new movie. And for that, you need to go to secretingredients.com, and please support the finishing of this movie to get it out as fast as possible. Every day really matters now. And anyway, what Jeffrey is saying that's super encouraging is that if consumers get more and more educated, which they are, and he's a big reason for it, about GMOs, and they stop buying them, then even if the biotech companies that, are fine with us all getting sick and dying from eating their product, even if they win by corrupting all and paying off or threatening or whatever they do, all the senators and congressmen to vote to stop GMO labeling, which is basically what they're doing, or what they're on the verge of doing. It's already been passed by the House, and they're working on the Senate right now. Even if that happens, Jeffrey points out that if the consumers vote with our dollars and just don't buy this stuff, then it won't matter whether it's labeled or not. Everybody will be buying certified organic food, which won't contain GMO ingredients, and those companies will not be able to continue their business. This is a really important point. So anyway, without using up any more of our time, let's go and hear Jeffrey, and I'll talk to you after that, and then we'll get into the next amazing guest that happens after that. But I've been trying to get Jeffrey Smith on the phone for months, on the show for months. And we finally managed to do that. He's incredibly busy trying to work all over the country and other parts of the world to wake people up as fast as possible so the GMOs, one way or another, can go away, which is the only suitable thing for them to do. So listen carefully. Please support the finishing of his movie, secretingredientsmovie.com. And we cover really a lot of important information on this discussion. At the very end, if it seems like he's leaving abruptly, he is, because I kept him late unknowingly. We got cut off so many times, which often happens for controversial subjects, and we just edit it back together, but it uses a lot more time, and I didn't realize he had an appointment to go to instantly after ours, so that was my fault. Anyway, enjoy Jeffrey Smith, and I'll talk to you right afterwards. Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs, broadcasting for Lost Arts Radio, and we have a special show tonight and a great chance to talk with a person who's been a hero of mine for a long time. Jeffrey Smith, the founder of Institute for Responsible Technology, is one of the leading voices in the world about genetically modified organisms education and teaching people what GMO food actually is and what we need to do to make sure that we're not eating it and that no one else is either. I'm really anxious to get into that discussion, but before we do, it seems like it would set the tone really well to listen to a 3-minute trailer for a new movie coming out, and it's called Secret Ingredients, a movie that you'll definitely want to see. And later on we'll direct you to the URL where you can actually see the video version of this really great trailer, and I would recommend that you do that right after the show as well. So let's at least listen to the audio, and then we'll get on to our visit with Jeffrey Smith.
So at the time that I was doing triathlons and living a healthy lifestyle, I met my husband. He also was very dedicated to healthy living, and we got married and started our family. So we had children and a brand new house, and we both had careers that we loved, and we were both active and physical, and that all came to a screeching halt in August of 2007.
I mean, after all, it's a poison.
The biggest fraud in the history of science.
And we are the guinea pigs.
We had 21 chronic diseases in one family.
I have had 3 miscarriages.
I've seen a rapid decline in children's health in the past 10 to 15 years.
We had to rent the nebulizer so often from the pediatrician that she suggested we buy our own.
My daughter was about 8 years old, and she was puffy, and she was starting to develop breasts.
His body was covered in rashes, head to toe, behind the knees, was so inflamed he was bleeding.
Kids who can't control themselves, kids who can't transition, kids who can't focus, kids who can't sleep.
A well-respected neurologist said that he would never speak and that he would never have peer relationships or social experiences, potentially not live on his own, never get married.
Why is a chemical company in charge of the food?
So many diseases and disorders have skyrocketed since the introduction of GMOs and Roundup in the food supply in the mid-1990s. Asthma, allergies, autism, ADHD, anxiety, autoimmune disease, and that's just the AIDS.
I've removed genetically modified food and had kids eat all organic food. No pesticides, no GMOs. And the changes I've seen are remarkable.
So we went from, your son has autism, your daughter has asthma, to no, they don't.
Her belly is completely flattened out, and she's stopped that accelerated development. You know, she is where I feel like she belongs as an 11-year-old little girl.
Stephen now is an articulate, lovely, straight-A student with many friends, active, plays sports. He participates in a mainstream classroom without any supports, no speech therapy, no articulation disorder, no physical therapy, no occupational therapy. He does all the things other children do with great ease and elegance and grace, and he is perfect.
I am 22 weeks pregnant, and I feel fantastic.
This shift can only come by a global desire to change our food supply.
The removal of genetically modified foods, glyphosate, and pesticides was the fundamental, the foundation for why we all recovered.
Our families have been told a lie.
So this is a pretty intense, emotional trailer that we just heard the audio from, and I think a couple of important points from it are, first of all, the understanding that none of us should be eating GMO ingredients in any of our food, but the other is to make it very clear that this is not just an intellectual scientific issue. This is highly personal. It has an emotional impact on every aspect of our lives, and everyone has a stake in this who eats food from the American food supply. So we have a lot to talk about, and it directly impacts every member of your family, and that's what we're going to get into. So welcome, Jeffrey. I'm really pleased that you had the time to spend with us tonight. It's going to be
sure. Thank you very much. And I wanted to say that if people want to see the visuals of the trailer, it's at secretingredientsmovie.com. The name of the movie, which is under production, and I'm the co-producer and co-editor with my partner Amy Hart. We're actually raising funds now to finish it. We've gotten through most of the shooting and we're well underway into the editing. So we're on a crowdfunding program, and at secretingredientsmovie.com you can watch the trailer, make a donation, and learn more about the film. And it came about in an interesting way. My earlier film, Genetic Roulette, which was seen by millions of people around the world. It was played on PBS over 300 times. It created a wave of people avoiding GMOs because it makes it absolutely clear all these diseases are linked to GMOs, and so much evidence demonstrates that people were jumping off of the GMO bandwagon by tens of thousands, and we were hearing so many testimonials of people who were getting better after quickly eliminating GMOs from their diet after seeing the movie. And so we actually found this one family who's the sort of the center point of this new film, where they had 21 chronic conditions between the 5 members of the family. And the mother, the son was autistic, the mother was permanently disabled, the father had a breast tumor, there was eczema and asthma and all these other disorders in the family. And she began to study nutrition and started to experiment with the family with their food when the medical model ran out of what it could offer. And she got rid of gluten, and she got rid of commercial dairy and whatnot, and she noticed some improvements, but when she learned about GMOs and pesticides and switched to an organic diet, that's when all of the conditions rapidly improved. In fact, went away. And so we have her family, and we have others, and we have doctors and scientists and survey results and research studies all making this point that there's more than 20 chronic illnesses in the United States on the rise that are clearly linked to GMOs, and we've heard so much evidence that we're convinced that their increase in the U.S. Population since GMOs were introduced is related.
Right. It seems like at this point there's just no doubt at all that GMOs are basically inedible for anybody that doesn't want negative results. And I think in the interest of trying to bring in people to this discussion who may not have the background and are just finding out or trying to find out what GMOs actually are, can we do a little bit of review of what that is? And then if they're really so bad, how in the world is it that they're being allowed in the food supply when people are trusting these agencies? We have the FDA and USDA and all these agencies that have promised to make sure that nothing unsafe gets in the food supply. But I'd like to start with what they actually are so everyone's up to speed.
Well, with genetic engineering, you can swap genes between species. So you could take a gene from a spider and put it into a goat in the hopes that you can milk the goat to get spiderweb protein to make bulletproof vests. I'm not making this up. This was actually done, and it was not successful. You could put human genes into corn to make a spermicide. They've done that. They can mix and match across species, across kingdoms, and that way they can create completely new organisms that were not part of the billions of years of evolution, but they can create them, in an instant. In addition to that, the process of genetic engineering itself, of the insertion process, plus in the case of plants, cloning the cell into a plant, creates massive collateral damage in the DNA of that plant. And so at the end of the day, if you start with a natural corn plant, for example, and then you equip it with a pesticide gene in every cell, you not only have a gene-sized spray bottle in every cell of the plant, you also end up with 2 to 4% of that DNA different, and that's mostly mutations, which can be hundreds or thousands of mutations up and down the DNA. And like in the case of Monsanto's corn, you have a new allergen that's never been in corn before. In the case of their soy, you have 7 times the amount of the normal existing soy allergen that's found in normal soy. You can have toxins, you can have nutritional problems, you can have carcinogens turned on. So it's like, this is one reason why I called my recent movie Genetic Roulette, because you're really spinning the wheel and wondering what you're going to get when you do this genetic engineering process. Now, these side effects were not lost on the FDA scientists who were asked to evaluate the technology back in the early 90s. They tapped a group of scientists at the agency and said, can you please evaluate GMOs so we can create a policy from your evaluation? Unfortunately, they did not base the policy on the evaluation. The evaluation by the scientists pointed out that GMOs were different and dangerous and could lead, as we said, to allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. And they urged their superiors to require long-term safety studies, including human studies, on every single GMO introduced. But the White House had instructed the leadership of the FDA to promote GMOs. And so they recruited Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney, to take a new position designed specifically for him, the Deputy Commissioner of Policy. And as the Deputy Commissioner of Policy, he was in charge of determining and setting forth the policy on GMOs. And when the scientists wrote their suggestions and passed it on to the upper management, essentially Michael Taylor, then every time they got a new draft back, more and more of their concerns were removed systematically until eventually one scientist complained that there was no science in the policy whatsoever, that it was a pro-industry document that ignored the side effects, and he predicted that if you're not going to be requiring any safety studies, which is ultimately what they did, then even the basic safety studies would not be done, which is also true. So we have a situation where the FDA, basically captured by Monsanto, allows Monsanto itself to determine whether its own GMOs are safe, and Monsanto could put it on the market without even telling the FDA or consumers. Michael Taylor then after leaving the FDA, became Monsanto's vice president, and now he's back at the FDA in the Obama administration as their food safety czar. So we don't have an independent organization in the government that is protecting our health. We have an enforcement wing of the biotech industry, and that's not only reflected in Michael Taylor's tenure at the agency, but also people at the USDA and at the EPA and another and also even the State Department. If you look at the WikiLeaks, the State Department is deployed as a marketing arm of the biotech industry.
Wow. So initially when Michael Taylor was in the FDA the first time, and in that position that you said was so critical to the policy formation, how did he get in that position originally?
Actually, it was his second time. First, he was as part of the FDA. Then he moved to King & Spalding law firm, and his clients included Monsanto, as well as a biotechnology council. Now, for the council and Monsanto, he was tapped to design a regulatory framework that would be the most friendly for the introduction of GMOs. So he created a hypothetical framework that would just wave GMOs onto the market. And then, when the first Bush administration told the FDA to promote GMOs, I don't know how they were told, but they were basically picked him for this new position, probably at the urgency of the biotech industry, so that he could basically implement the regulatory framework that he had designed for the industry to make it law in the United States. He also oversaw policy at the time that Monsanto's bovine growth hormone was being considered. And this is an interesting story. I talked to one Monsanto scientist whose 3 colleagues had done safety studies on the milk from cows treated with the company's bovine growth hormone. And they saw so much cancer-promoting hormone in the milk from treated cows, these 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. Now, even though it was clear to them, Michael Taylor approved bovine growth hormone. But it wasn't just him. A researcher from Monsanto who did research on bovine growth hormone for the company then was put in charge of a division at the FDA that reviewed her own research. Another contractor that was working on RBGH for Monsanto became the FDA's chief reviewer. And there was also a veterinarian who was alarmed at the fact that they were going to be putting RBGH in the market with so few safety studies. He started ordering more tests, and he was fired because he was holding up the approval process. When he sued in the court case, it became clear, and it was admitted that he was set up to be kicked out. The FDA was forced to take him back in, but he was not put on anything related to cows, which were his specialty. He was put on chickens and basically eliminated from, contributing anything meaningful to the agency because he had been a whistleblower. So it was another example of how the agency was skewed in the direction of supporting industry at the expense of public health.
I think one of the things that may be hardest for normal average people to comprehend and accept is that obviously these scientists were smart enough to know something about the harm that was going to come from these policies, and that was fine with them. They went ahead and did it anyway. And I think that's really hard for most people to grasp, that there are people in power positions that apparently have no concern about what damage is done by their policies.
It's interesting. I've talked to scientists on both sides of that equation. We know that at the time that the tobacco industry knew that nicotine was addictive, their CEOs and scientists claimed the opposite. We have an example from a former salesperson for Monsanto, Kirk Azevedo. He was recruited and he decided to take a position in the company because he read the glowing words of Robert Shapiro, who described the fact that GMOs could clean up factory wastes and clean up all these things and turn fields into factories, etc. And so during his company orientation, he got up and told his other new recruits how excited he was and repeated the words of Robert Shapiro. A vice president pulled him aside after the meeting and said, wait a minute, what Robert Shapiro says is one thing. He was the CEO of Monsanto. What he says is one thing. What we do is something else. He's the front man that tells the story, but we don't even know what he's talking about. We're here to make money. Right. And then later, Kirk learned about the fact that there was some new proteins being produced in the genetically modified products that he was supposed to sell. He knew that these proteins could be very dangerous to the animals and eventually to humans. He tried to raise the issue inside the company and was ostracized. He said no one would pay attention. He tried to blow the whistle by going to ag commissioners and university professors in California, and no one paid any attention. And so he left the company saying he wasn't going to be part of that disaster. And I've also heard from other scientists, one scientist I just happened to have lunch with from Monsanto, and I asked him, I said, what if you're disrupting the DNA in a way that you don't even have a way to evaluate yet. And I painted a real clear picture that was certainly plausible, where he was causing serious harm in the population from what he didn't know about DNA, and he simply could not answer. And then he came back after 2 minutes of silence and said, "But we need GMOs to feed the world." Yeah. And I knew that was his justification in his mind to risking these lives. And another scientist from Monsanto also told me the same thing when I said, you can't guarantee that these foods aren't going to create allergic reactions, which might eventually kill people. And he said, but we need GMOs because I've been to India and I've seen their agriculture and we need to get them GMOs. Well, that was before they had deployed GMOs in India. It turns out there's been about 250,000 farmer suicides in India from farmers that planted the genetically engineered cotton seeds and it failed so miserably. They were at risk of losing their land by the loan sharks that were going to basically take their land because they couldn't get paid back. And so they committed suicide to keep the land and the family and protect them from the shame of losing their land. An absolute genocide. And so this is what we get when we allow Monsanto, unfortunately, to come into this developing country with their unreliable GMOs.
I never really understood clearly how what you just said would happen. The suicides would keep the land from being repossessed. How does that work?
Well, they get some kind of payment for. In some cases it did. In some cases it didn't. The farmers would get the survivors would get the payment from the government when there was a suicide from the farmer.
So something like a life insurance deal, basically.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, right.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I thought, why would all these farmers just want to leave their families helpless with them gone? And what you just said explains it.
Yeah. It's a tragedy. And the biotech industry has so many myths that they propagate, and one of the myths is that the suicide has nothing to do with GMOs, even though surveys going door to door in the cotton growing regions have verified that 80 to 90% of the suicides are BT cotton related. BT is a certain type of GMO where the crop produces its own insecticide that breaks open the stomach of insects to kill them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it was also found to break open holes in human cells in a research study, so it might be causing leaky gut in humans at the same time.
Right, which makes complete sense. So, the other thing that you just mentioned is that a lot of these scientists, or you would assume a lot of the scientists working for Monsanto or working in USDA to support them, or part of this massive structure, have these justifications running psychologically in their own minds that what they're actually doing is saving the world. But the ones at the top of the company probably know better than that.
Absolutely. In fact, the world's leading report on how to feed the world, the Einstein report with more than 400 scientists, concluded that GMOs have nothing to offer feeding the hungry world, eradicating poverty, or creating sustainable agriculture, and rejected it outright. The head of Syngenta talked about how natural selective breeding always wins hands down over genetic engineering with these more complex traits like salt tolerance and drought tolerance and increased yield. So they know that the Feed the World exercise is just a public relations scam, but not everyone working for the company knows that. But we also have these, I've identified certain scientists who are basically, they don't care about facts at all, and they'll lie blatantly. And one was caught by the New York Times just about 3 weeks ago, Kevin Folta, who's been saying for years he gets no money from Monsanto. All of his criticisms of those of us who are concerned about GMOs are completely independently motivated. Turns out, because of a Freedom of Information Act, we found out that, or the New York Times found out that he was paid $25,000 to be a promoter of GMOs at Monsanto, and he lied about that, even as testifying before boards in states, pretending that he was completely independent. But it would also implicated Nina Fedorov, who was the science advisor to Hillary Clinton and to Condoleezza Rice, and was the head of the American Academy for Advancement of Science, It implicated her as part of this cabal of people producing these talking points. It implicated people at Cornell University and University of Mississippi. It implicated a guy who writes at Forbes as a blogger there. All these people who we knew for years were part of this talking point echo chamber. It all came out in this article, but unfortunately, the writer decided to focus on these low-level people like Bruce Chassey and Kevin Folta, and ignored the Nina Fedorov stature, because she is one of the highest-ranking members of this cabal, as well as the universities that get a lot of money from the biotech industry that participate in these talking points that are not true, but are echoed at high volumes to protect the fortunes of the biotech industry.
Right. So basically we have a subset of people that is willing to say anything to further the agenda, whether it's true or not, being irrelevant. And we have another subset of people that intersects with that one, that want to be in positions of control over others.
Yeah, I call them the liars and the lied to. Now, it's sometimes hard to tell which is which. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson came out, was interviewed, and said, "Oh, GMOs are just like what we've been doing for centuries." And that came out on YouTube, and I videotaped a YouTube response explaining, "No, Neil, that's actually not true. The FDA scientists that reviewed GMOs said that GMOs are different and lead to different risks, and trying to force the conclusion that GMOs are the same is like trying to force a square peg into a round hole." They were responding to Michael Taylor's policy, which falsely claimed that the agency wasn't aware of information showing that GMOs were significantly different. And that was the basis of the policy, saying no testing was necessary, no labeling was necessary. But it was a lie. It was exactly the opposite of the scientific opinion of those experts at the agency. But that lie became national policy, and it's echoed even in the false understanding of scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's well known but obviously misinformed.
So is the way the system is set up now in the agencies and in the private corporations such that honest people with good motivations are not going to get into those positions of power to straighten things out there?
So far, that's the case. The head of the USDA, Secretary Vilsack, was the biotech governor of the year in Iowa. The head of USAID was a GMO cheerleader. The person that negotiates international trade deals for the U.S. for agriculture was a lobbyist for the biotech industry. There's so many, there's a long, long list. Mm-hmm. So right now, the government, it's hard to know where the government ends and GMO industry people begin. So there's a marriage there in that particular industry. And it's interesting that under Clinton, Secretary Glickman, Dan Glickman, said that what I saw generically from the pro-biotech side was the attitude that the technology was good and that it was immoral to say that it wasn't good because it was going to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. And if you're against it, you're Luddites. And he said that basically was the side our government was on. You felt like you were an alien or disloyal by trying to present an open-minded view. That's a quote. Now, he also said that when he did, and it was written into his speeches, the whole pro-GMO dialogue was written into his speeches, and when he diverted from that, improvised, and raised questions about the technology, he said he got slapped around by not only the people in the Clinton administration, but by industry, and believed he was going to lose his job until Hillary mentioned to him that she liked his speech. And then he knew he maintained a job. But Hillary, it turns out, one person that runs her campaign was a Monsanto attorney. She had a fundraiser in that attorney's office. She's spoken before the biotech industry organization saying that GMOs, basically cheerleading for GMOs. So it turns out she's pro-GMO and also probably misinformed. So it's hard to, like you say, it's hard to get people who are open-minded and informed in any position of responsibility, given the way that they're insulated at that top and basically pummeled with this talking point echo chamber.
Right. And, you would certainly hope that their positions are because they're misinformed, but there's also the possibility that they're fully informed and they're in favor of it anyway.
It's true, and I've heard various people talk about GMOs, that they've heard from government bodies about GMOs as a method for exerting power over developing countries, etc. And it makes sense. I mean, if you own the seeds, you own the food, and if you own the food, you can control the people. And a lot of people talk about that. So it appears that the security side of the U.S. may be in favor of GMOs if they can control them. But what happened is, it's interesting, the open gate policy for GMOs may have backfired already, because we have no requirements to test for the safety of imported GMOs from other countries. So there's rumors that China is producing genetically modified crops that we're importing, that we don't even know which ones they are. We don't know what they're genetically modified to do. We don't know if they've been tested for safety or if they're even purposely a problem. You can theoretically genetically modify things now to have impact on human behavior. Certainly they did that years ago when they genetically engineered tobacco plants, grew them illegally in Brazil, smuggled them into the United States, put one highly addictive cigarette into each of the packs in the U.S. illegally to get people more addicted. So they used genetic engineering to increase the addictive behavior of tobacco, and they could do things like that with food and etc. So it's a very, very dangerous technology, given what its capacity is. It's at the infant stages. The number one effect of GMOs are surprise side effects, and the regulation is almost non-existent.
Right. And now, one thing I think they've been well proven to be very effective at and successful is, if anybody happened to be interested in radical population reduction in the fairly near term, the third generation of rats that I was looking at was completely...
It was actually hamsters.
Hamsters, I'm sorry. They were completely unable to have babies. Is that right?
Well, what happened is this. We've seen a number of studies that affect fertility. We've seen them in mice, in rats, and hamsters. The one you're referring to is a not yet published study by a researcher at the National Academy of Sciences in Russia, and they fed hamsters GM soy for 3 generations, and by the 3rd generation, most were not able to get pregnant. The hamsters died at 4 or 5 times the rate of infant mortality compared to the controls, and many had hair growing in their mouths. Now, I spoke with the author of the study by email several times, and one of the things that's holding him up, he really wants to identify what the cause is for these problems. And here we're going to introduce another topic to the listeners if they don't already know it. The major reason they genetically engineer crops is to spray those crops with Roundup herbicide. Roundup is Monsanto's herbicide, and Roundup-ready crops are their seeds. So if someone buys a Roundup-ready seed, then they can grow that and spray it with Monsanto's Roundup herbicide. And so 80% or so of the crops out there are Roundup ready. And you end up spraying the crops with Roundup. It gets absorbed into the crop. You can't wash it off. You eat it, and it is linked to cancer. It's been declared a probable human carcinogen by the World Health Organization. It's linked to massive birth defects in areas where there's high levels of Roundup or its active ingredient glyphosate, which is mostly what we're talking about, glyphosate. It's linked to an endocrine disrupting properties. It's an antibiotic, which means it can mess up the gut bacteria balance, killing off the lactobacillus and the bifidus and the stuff we pay for, and allowing an overgrowth of the pathogenic bacteria. It damages the mitochondria. It can mess up the hormonal balance. It can the balance of neurotransmitters like serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine. It can result potentially in the reduction in vitamin D and the inability of the liver to detoxify, and it can take minerals out of circulation in the body and tie them up so that they're not able to be used by the body for key functions. So it's also linked to messing up the balance between estrogen and testosterone, and it's also Roundup-ready soy, for example, has been shown to damage the young sperm cells and to damage the testicles and to damage the uterus and ovaries and hormonal cycles of rats and mice. So this scientist is trying to figure out whether this impact on the 3rd generation of hamsters is from the Roundup or it's from the Roundup-ready crops. Now, there was another study that was done 3 years ago, where they took Roundup Ready corn and fed it to rats over 2 years, and the rats had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage compared to controls. But they also wanted to know whether it was the Roundup or the corn, and so they had two other experimental groups. They had a group that just ate the corn, the Roundup Ready corn, that had never been sprayed with Roundup, and that group also had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. But then they had another group of rats, actually several, that had no GM corn, just natural corn, but they had Roundup spiked into their drinking water at very, very, in some cases, very small levels. And they also had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. So it turns out they found out that it was both the Roundup and the corn that caused the problem.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty conclusive. So the man with the hamsters doesn't really have to worry about the confusion anymore. The answer is known, right?
I actually really wanted him to publish what he had, even if he didn't have the causative pathway, but he was holding out.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. So, I mean, if people can kind of jar themselves awake to look at this without the, what do I want to say, the familiarity that makes them, what is it called, a normalcy bias, right? That things can't be that strange as what you're just really describing.
Wow, I haven't heard that since I took statistics in graduate school. Yeah. So it's like there's a tendency to want to believe that the government is protecting us. There's a tendency to want to believe that companies can't be that dismissive of health dangers. But in recent interviews, there was an interview with with Anthony Samsel, a scientist, and he was given by the EPA 15 to 20,000 sealed documents that they had received from Monsanto on safety studies. And they somehow were able to get the EPA to seal those documents so no one else saw it, but he was able to get it. And he said they knew that there was cancer to all these different organs, bioaccumulation in all these different organs, low dose effects on all these different organs, and yet they continued to uphold the lies of the company that none of it was true, even though they had the proof that it was true. Mm-hmm. And I was just talking to Anthony yesterday and listening to one of his interviews, and it was clear that the industry knew, the government knew, and yet they hid the evidence.
So how much of the success of biotech companies, notably Monsanto, but also Syngenta and Bayer and all the other ones that work with them, how much of that success do you think is due to and perhaps dependent on, to some degree, government cooperation with everything they want to do?
It's 100%, because the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in the United States is a very strong law, one of the strongest in the world, to protect the safety of food. And it requires that any time there's an additive, a food additive, that it be tested and labeled as such. And there's only one way that an additive is not allowed, that would be able to be exempt from these requirements, as far as I know, and that is if it becomes, quote, generally recognized as safe. Now, in order to be generally recognized as safe, there's two criteria. And one is that it has to have plenty of peer-reviewed published studies or the equivalent, and overwhelming scientific consensus of safety. Now, when GMOs were introduced, the FDA did something that many consider to be illegal. They said, we will give the companies themselves the ability to determine whether their foods are generally recognized as safe, even though it had no history of peer-reviewed published studies, and it had no consensus of safety. Even the scientists working at the FDA said GMOs were different and dangerous and needed to be tested. So they violated the law in order to pave the way for GMOs to be introduced, according to experts in the law, and that is why GMOs are on our plate, because of industry manipulation and political collusion. And then I've traveled to 42 countries speaking about GMOs in the last 19 years, and I speak to some governments elsewhere, and they said, well, we don't have to worry about GMOs because the FDA approved it. Well, the FDA doesn't approve GMOs. They let the companies themselves determine if the foods are safe. And then if you look at the FDA, if you look at Monsanto, as we see before, even the scientists working there won't necessarily consume their products because they consider them unsafe.
Right. So now this policy decision to let the company itself decide if it's generally recognized as safe, which is really pretty incredible. And if you don't know this kind of thing is going on, I'm assuming that is certainly selectively applied. If I had a small organic food company, they would not let me decide if my food was safe to sell on the market, right?
Well, the thing is this, what's different about that, I mean, you could grow broccoli and sell it on the market, and if you wanted to be organic, then you'd have to be certified and tested, or not tested, but inspected. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that it's not normal. If it's genetically engineered, it's not the natural normal broccoli. Now, fortunately, broccoli is not genetically engineered. There's only 9 GM food crops, and I'll name them because some of your people are already nervous and wondering what they can eat and what they can't eat. So let me make sure that that's clear. There's soy and corn, which are in most everything. So all the derivatives of soy and corn are GMO, except if it says non-GMO or organic, and popcorn is not GMO. So your corn syrup, corn, maltodextrin, dextrose, things that may come from corn will be genetically engineered if produced in North America. You have canola oil and cottonseed oil. You have sugar from sugar beets. Now, most people don't realize that most sugar in the United States is from sugar beets, and as well as cane sugar, but most is sugar beet sugar. So if it says sugar on the ingredient panel, it's a combination. There's also alfalfa, which is used as animal hay. There's papaya from Hawaii or China, and there's some zucchini and yellow squash. Next year, they want to introduce apples and potatoes. So those are the only 9 crops currently on the market, plus the apple-potato combination for next year. There's no other GMOs. The seedless watermelon's not there. There's no more tomatoes on the market. They were taken off 18 years ago. There's no potatoes currently on the market. The old stock of potatoes was taken off the market in 2001. But these soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, papaya, zucchini, and yellow squash are the 9 GMOs. Now, what's different about the law is that if you create a genetically modified papaya, you can put it on the market without even telling the FDA or telling consumers by labeling it. And that, we think, is a violation of the law because it would be considered a food additive, and the food additive, and they've basically exempted it from food additive status.
Okay. So, one thing that complicates this situation is that it's like this creeping amount of illegality in government that's being accepted more and more, and it's no longer is it legal or not for the government to do this. Is more like, is this the usual baseline illegal behavior that we can't do anything about? Or
it's similar to what Dr. Louis Pribble said, who was a microbiologist at the FDA who was concerned about the GMO policy. He said that one of the problems with the policy is that over time, people will think, well, it's been done hundreds or thousands of times already, so it must be safe.
Right.
So there'll be a kind of in the same way that there's the pile on the illegality, there's the pile on of the assumption that it must be safe because everyone's doing it, it's been on the market, etc.
Yes.
And at the same time, there is the effort to block the publications of independent research, and then once things are publicized or published, then to attack, distort, and deny the evidence. And this is something that we found common since the mid-1990s. When scientists discover problems, they're fired, stripped of responsibilities, denied tenure, denied funding, threatened, all these things. And it's been repeated so often, it was even described in the journal Nature as the common result of a knee-jerk reaction to any time someone discovers a problem. And so this has been a strong disincentive for scientists to take up research in this area, so strong that literally hundreds of scientists who would have done research in this area refuse to. And if they do want to do research, they can't get access to the seeds because they're patented. They can't get access to money. They can't get things published. And if they do get published, then their entire career is under threat. So it's a very well-oiled machine that is delivering dangerous products into our food supply. And all of this is very well documented. My book, Seeds of Deception, was written in 2003, and it describes many of these things that happened before then. There's a book out by Stephen Drucker called Altered Genes, Twisted Truth that came out this year, describes things for the last 30 years. It's really well documented, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It is history.
Right, and the reason I asked you how much of it depends on the total cooperation between the government, which now is literally a web of corporations itself, and the private corporations is because, I mean, I know this is kind of old-fashioned to think that the Constitution is still in force, but theoretically it's still the law of the land for the federal government's restrictions. And as far as I remember, there's a clause in there called the Enumerated Powers Clause, and according to it, the government's not allowed to operate in agriculture at all.
Well, I wasn't aware of that, but now we have a situation where the DARK Act, which we call DARK because it's D-A-R-K, Denying Americans the Right to Know, makes it illegal for states to pass laws requiring labeling of GMOs. Now, this was passed in the Congress, but not the Senate. So it was the House, not the Senate. And the Senate will take it up soon. And so we encourage people to call senators with the information about the DARK Act, which they can simply Google online, and urge them not to vote in favor of the DARK Act. Yeah. But right now, like Vermont passed a law requiring labeling, and if this DARK Act passes, then that becomes null and void. There's many other states that are going to be passing labeling requirements, we believe, soon, unless this DARK Act passes. So that actually does the opposite of what you said. It disallows states and any jurisdictions below state level to pass laws related to GMOs in agriculture. So it will nullify 43 existing laws that aren't necessarily labeling, but other laws. So it's really preempting states' rights and local rights. Yeah. And then there's these treaties, the Transatlantic or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and then the TTIP for Europe. They also could, if they're passed, they could result in foreign powers, foreign governments, or even foreign companies suing our government, saying that these laws are illegal because they're preventing us to have profits in your country. And so it's a way of preempting even federal law. So right. So these corporations have layers of influence moving up the chain from local to state to federal to international.
Right, and it seems to me that, I mean, I don't know if you know about this or not, but it seems to me that Congress cannot ratify a treaty that's unconstitutional.
You know, it's a very interesting thing. I was talking to someone who had experience arguing things before the Supreme Court, and he pointed out the same thing. Now, we're dealing with a situation in Hawaii where their state constitution allows for, first of all, rights to the land, to nature. Mm-hmm. So because that was one of the conditions of the takeover of from the colonization of Hawaii, was the land, or what they call Aina, is extremely important. They also in Hawaii gave the people the right to vote directly on things that would overturn state laws produced by the legislature. This was discovered by some friends of mine who then created the first and only ballot initiative using that particular law, and they won a vote where it basically would have caused Monsanto to stop doing business in the county of Maui because they couldn't prove that their crops and associated agricultural chemicals were safe. So it was going to stop them until they were able to prove that it was safe. But the government in Hawaii, in Maui, was in collusion with the industry, and so they pretended to sue each other, and then it went to a judge who was also apparently on side with the industry, mm-hmm. and they nullified the election. So the industry, in conjunction with the executive branch, in conjunction with the court system, nullified a constitutional provision, and that's under appeal right now. And we hope that the appeals court will then nullify the effects of the judge that basically ignored the will of the people and ignored the Constitution. But it's that kind of insidiousness, it's that kind of penetrated influence. Clarence Thomas, who's in the Supreme Court, used to be a Monsanto lawyer, and when there was a ruling that was in favor of Monsanto, he wrote the majority position and never recused himself. There was another judge that was it was interesting. A friend of mine was suing Monsanto and trying to get class action status. He got overturned by a judge, and the New York Times wrote about it and said, unbeknownst to anyone, this judge used to be the lawyer of record for Monsanto, never announced and never recused himself. So we have all these three branches of government that are in the pockets. And what I feel is that we actually, in spite of that, have a victory that's pending very soon. Because we can win the entire battle of GMOs without any policy change. We can win the battle of GMOs simply by turning GMO ingredients into a marketing liability. This is what we call a tipping point. This is what happened in Europe in 1999 when Unilever on April 27th, followed by Nestle's the next day, followed by the rest of the food industry soon after, committed to stop using GM ingredients. Because there, the press was covering the health dangers, was covering a major GMO food safety scandal, which I write about in my books and my movies, and that was covered there but not here, and so people were agitated, they were concerned about GMOs. It's been kicked out of Europe since 1999. Bovine growth hormone was kicked out of most American dairies 7 to 9 years ago. GMOs were kicked out of the natural products industry 2 years ago. Each of these were tipping points based on market forces, based on people educated about the health dangers of GMOs or bovine growth hormone. So now we are educating people, and this is why the film Secret Ingredients is so important. This is why we want to get it out to millions of people, because if normal consumers, especially moms trying to protect their kids, realize how dangerous GMOs are and start choosing the non-GMO labeled products in Safeway, in Publix, etc., and there's more and more of those, and those groups start increasing in market share, then we end up with a tipping point when the food company realizes that using GM ingredients has become a marketing liability. And that's what we're working at the Institute for Responsible Technology at responsibletechnology.org. So people are welcome to go there and sign up to become part of the Tipping Point Network, sign up for our free newsletter, sign up to become to learn how to speak on GMOs, etc. A lot of good material is there, a lot of good opportunities are there, and I say we are actually winning the fight, and we see the early signs of a tipping point in conventional food industry on the horizon.
So will everything that you just said apply if it becomes illegal to do the labeling?
Yes.
Okay.
You see, where it would become a problem is if it became illegal for voluntarily non-labeling something non-GMO. You see, we got rid of bovine growth hormone without requiring labels saying that products are from cows treated with bovine growth hormone, because so many dairies were announcing voluntarily on their label that it was made without the hormone. Right. Now we have over 32,000 products that are verified non-GMO, boasting on their packaging that they're non-GMO, and we have Cheerios and Grape Nuts, and I can't believe it's not butter, and Smart Balance, and soon Hershey's, and also a new Similac brand, all declaring non-GMO, and that could provide the difference needed for consumers to drive the tipping point.
Okay, so as long as they leave it legal to voluntarily state that there are no GMOs, then that whole strategy can work.
Yes.
Right. And the organic option is there too, and as long as the standards specify that it can't have GMO ingredients, and that's another additional benefit, right? I mean, people can choose organic food.
In fact, choosing organic is more important these days than ever before, because Roundup, which is certainly one of the reasons why GMOs are so dangerous, it's also sprayed on non-GMO crops as a ripening agent just before harvest, including wheat, rye, barley, oats, rice, also potatoes, sweet potatoes, citrus crops. I'm told almond orchards. It's sprayed a lot in agriculture. It's in a lot of our food, but it's not used in organic agriculture. So we say buy organic as the priority, and if you can't buy organic, at least buy non-GMO.
Okay, all right. And this should be a market force to get more farmers into organic farming as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you can find out which products are GMO or non-GMO by going to non-GMOshoppingguide.com. There you have the 32,000 products listed, and also the hidden ingredients, the derivatives of soy and corn, which you wouldn't necessarily know are genetically engineered.
Okay, great. Is that on the same site?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Excellent. So you're kind of playing down a little bit the critical nature of this Stark Act because it doesn't undermine the strategy that you just described.
Well, what it does, I mean, here's the thing. If GMOs were labeled as such, 57 or 8% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs if they were labeled.
Okay.
Now, that would be, in my mind, if it takes 18 months, for example, for the food companies to implement labeling, I think in those 18 months they would get rid of GMOs rather than admit that they're using them. Mm-hmm. So I think it would accelerate the tipping point dramatically. They don't want that. So the biotech industry and the food companies have spent over $100 million fighting ballot initiatives in 4 states, trying to deny Americans the right to know. Now they've spent tens of millions in lobbying Congress to try and do it all at once. They don't have to fight these laws, fight these votes state by state. It is a tragedy if it passes, but it's not the end game.
Okay.
Because, in fact, we do. I personally, when I started with GMOs 19 years ago, I did a strategic analysis and realized, the biotech industry has billions of dollars. I have $1.95. They own Congress, but their weak point is the consumer concern for the health dangers, and that's what they confirmed also in Europe when the eruption of the concern came out. Burson Marsteller, who's their PR firm, for all these nasty chemical producers, said, the concern is going to be about health and about long-term environmental problems, and don't engage in debates, etc.
Right. Okay, so that's why we're in touch with Ronnie Cummins, for example. He was saying in a release this morning that Monsanto's activity now with the Senate is educating them, in quotes, that this will actually provide fair and accurate labeling for all the food and end the whole issue in a positive manner. And he's suggesting that some of the senators may actually believe that, which I found hard to imagine.
Well, I've spoken to politicians around the world, and a lot of them are just, when you hear the same thing from many people, the biotech industry does a lot of underhanded stuff. They were contacting people who are pro-GMO labeling and saying, call your senator or call your congressman to tell them to pass it because it'll give us labeling.
Yeah.
So that people were contacting them for the wrong information.
Yeah, amazing. So the people in the Senate are not necessarily real experts on this subject. They're just noticing what impressive authorities tell them which pieces of information.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So basically the most important thing, besides, if possible, not getting this bill passed, is that everybody needs to be very educated and take the time to read labels and not buy GMO. Right.
And I also think people listening to this show should not only do it for themselves, but they should do it for others. Up to this point, the most effective tool for convincing someone to avoid GMOs has been the movie Genetic Roulette, which is available at geneticroulettemovie.com. The movie that we think will be even more powerful is Secret Ingredients, which is available to donate to at secretingredientsmovie.com. Genetic Roulette was seen by millions in every country, played over 300 times on PBS. It was very, very effective, but it didn't have the personal side, the stories of individuals getting better. And this is what this particular movie has, and so it's going to become a lot more viral, a lot more sticky, so to speak, a lot more effective. Right. And so that I think that, when it comes to me in terms of my priorities, my priority is to create a massive consumer education campaign using the most effective tools that we know about to change people's diet so that using GMOs becomes a marketing liability for the food companies so they get rid of it.
Yes.
And that's already happening. 15% of Americans in 2007 said they were avoiding or reducing GMOs already. 40% said it last year. Even if not all that many people are doing what they're saying, it shows a swelling, a explosion of anti-GMO belief and associated, desires. And this is exactly where we're going to win ultimately.
Right. Now, it occurred to me to ask you the question too. What happens if this sentiment against GMO spreads enough so that people even start demanding non-GMO corn and soy and things like that are almost totally available at this point. Do the farms start arising that can turn that around even with those crops?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It just takes some growing seasons to replace because, you just grow out enough non-GMO seed and you just plant that. Right now, most of the soy foods sold in the natural food industry are non-GMO, and, there's 93% of the soy or corn, but there's still 7% that are not. And most of the soy or corn is used as animal feed, and some are used as biofuel. So it's just a question of once we tip the marketplace, the seed dealers are going to have to produce non-GMO seeds. So within a few growing seasons, it'll reverse trend.
Right. Another thing that came up for me was a question on people growing food organically. If they're going to use manure in their garden to help the soil, they have to check on what animals it came from, right, and what they were eating, because
absolutely
the genetic material goes into the manure, I would assume, right?
Yeah. In fact, the chicken manure contains a lot of glyphosate in it.
Right. Yeah, the glyphosate is the other thing. So it just needs the rising of a much stronger organic industry, it sounds like, just producing what's needed for the market.
Well, to me, and what happens is, if you go to the demand side, you'll be most effective. If you try and convince the supply side, try and convince farmers to change their habits, and you're going against a huge disinformation campaign where most of their information comes from the biotech industry, the seed dealers, the chemical dealers, the land-grant universities, the extension agents, the farm journals, the farm bureau, etc. They're all basically funded, or the biotech industry themselves. But if you go to the consumers, and so that the demand is for more non-GMO and organic, and the premiums are higher, all the farmers are economists. They're always looking at future prices and stuff, and they realize, oh my God, I can make $2 more, or $5 more, or $3 more per bushel, depending on whether it's non-GMO, organic, etc.
Right.
And that'll move the market the easiest way, just as long as we have enough non-GMO seed to go around.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be at a premium, and that will bring more people into the market producing it, I would think.
Yes, definitely.
And how are you planning on disseminating and promoting the new movie?
I'm not sure. The last time I did Genetic Roulette, it was out just before Prop 37, which was the vote for labeling in California. So I rushed the production and rushed it into distribution. We had a free showing week online, co-sponsored by Mercola.com and other groups, and we had 1.2 million views within a week. And then when we extended a few more weeks, we had more than 2 million views. And then we got it through PBS, and it's been played all over, and it's been translated and played on many international stations. But I don't know exactly how we're going to do secret ingredients. We have some ideas, but I can't share those ideas publicly because I know who else is listening.
Okay, no problem.
All right.
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting debates lately, too, on YouTube between Monsanto representatives, and I think one of them actually was a girl about 15 years old. Are you familiar with that one?
Rachel Parent. I just was with her 2 weeks ago. She's from Canada.
Okay.
She has the Kids Right to Know group there, and she started when she was 13.
Wow. Yeah, she was really impressive. I think the Monsanto representative asked her if she was really a lobbyist and what kind of ulterior motives she actually was hiding.
Yeah, actually, it was a Canadian show host, I think. I don't know if he was actually from Monsanto, but he was one that had been convinced, and so she actually won that debate. Yeah,
exactly. And I guess they're still trying to tell people that this is the way to feed the world, right? That's why we need GMOs.
That's one of the things that they're pretending.
Yeah, and it turns out that almost there are no advantages in the growing ability or the resistance to drought or the yield amounts or any. That's all made up, apparently, right?
Yeah, the yield is actually lower on average than the conventional, and it also is less resilient to drought and bad weather.
Right. The other thing I wanted to ask you is Institute for Responsible Technology, I think, has a lot of different kinds of outreach programs going on, at the same time, including, I think I saw something on your site related to kids learning about GMOs and things like that in the schools.
Yeah, we there's plenty of stuff going on both on our website and also on our Facebook page. We don't have any curriculum yet for schools, but we've been told that there's some people that want to create curriculum. We're going to distribute it as soon as it's available. Mm-hmm. But we do have a lot of information that I've been helping to put together for close to 20 years that's on the site. And also we're going to be launching a new site momentarily with a lot of new information. So we also have information about Roundup on there. So okay. And then a new site coming on board about Roundup as well.
Okay. I also wanted to know what's the current status and maybe just a little bit of background for people to understand something about like a character reference for the biotech industry in the sense that they have a history, I think, of letting GMO seeds go on to non-GMO farms and then suing the farm for trying to steal the patented seeds. Is that right? And if so, what's going on with that right now?
Well, yeah, they don't allow farmers to save seeds and replant it. So they've gone after seed cleaners. They've gone after farmers. Some of the farmers they went after never planted or never bought Monsanto seeds. It was just from cross-contamination. Or we've heard that some people from Monsanto, we've heard this, haven't verified it, actually throw their GMO seeds onto fields in order to create contamination. Mm-hmm. And we've also heard that they'll drop Roundup from planes to see if the fields will withstand it. And if they find one that withstands it that's not supposed to have it, they'll file a lawsuit. They'll go onto properties illegally. They use the retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Pinkerton cops in the U.S. So they've sued or taken to court or settled for over 300 farmers and farm organizations for hundreds of millions. It's been a disaster.
Wow. Is that still going on, that they're suing people for having their seed even if they don't know it?
Yeah.
Wow. I heard something about, maybe it was in California or some other state, that the state actually made it so that would not keep happening in their local area.
Yeah, they can't be sued for small presence. Some states have looked at that. I don't know how much is going on right now. The Center for Food Safety did a nice report on it in the past. I haven't seen any more recent evidence, but what happens is when they settle with a farmer, they seal the documents. They make sure the farmer is basically blocked from saying anything.
Okay, that's one of the stipulations for the settlement, is you can't talk.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, the other thing I noticed is in your trailer, there's some major. We've been having some people on about some major causes of autism, and it sounds like the GMOs are definitely something that can aggravate or cause neurological problems, including autism, because that was one of the things that the people said got better when they went non-GMO.
Yeah, that was the case. I mean, in my other film, Genetic Roulette, actually was my third film, there were 3 families that talked about when they went to a non-GMO organic diet, their kids got better from autism, either improved or actually, dramatically improved. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, there's at least 2 kids that have no longer the diagnosis, the classification as being autistic. Yeah. We think that glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, may be a major contributor to the rising rates of autism. It's certainly not an exclusive contributor, because there was explosions before glyphosate was used a lot on crops and in the food supply. Yeah. But there's a lot of biochemical reasons why glyphosate seems to be locking into that diagnosis, the way it chelates minerals and damages the mitochondria and blocks certain pathways and is an antibiotic and kills beneficial gut bacteria. It might cause leaky gut and all these different things that are already part of the diagnosis and characteristic of these autistic children. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of, I've spoken to parents, and you'll see it in the film Secret Ingredients, where when they take an autistic child and they change the diet, a certain percentage of those children recover or get dramatically better. Right. Not all of them, a certain percentage. And so it's not a cure-all, and it's not something that's been proven in laboratories, but it's been certainly proven in people's lives to have that effect, but only in a certain percentage.
Okay, all right. So, the recognition now being more widespread that glyphosate itself is a threat to life, basically.
Right, and I think as we wrap up the interview, I think what I want to do is leave people on a positive note, and say this: certainly buy organic whenever you can. In fact, I would suggest switching to 100% organic diet.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
For a number of weeks, and as a minimum. And during that time, take notes about your health, your sleep, your mood, your behavior. Not only yours, but if you do it with your family, the whole family. There's evidence suggesting that when switching to organic, I've seen this over and over again with parents saying their kids no longer are acting out, they're no longer violent, school's not calling home and complaining. Some kids that were going to be kicked out of school are no longer in that position. Some kids who were having a lot of problems are now at the top of their class. So many mood and behavior issues have changed, as well as sleep patterns, as well as many, many chronic diseases. The number one category that we found in both surveys as well as in hand counts of more than 125 lectures is gastrointestinal. The next one is always increased energy and reduced brain fog. Then you have asthma and allergies and skin conditions and joint pain and mental issues or behavioral or emotional issues like anxiety and depression. All these things we've seen have massive numbers of people have shown improvements switching to an organic and non-GMO diet. So we strongly recommend that people take notes for themselves and their family, and when they switch to 100% organic, and then see what their life is like eating real food.
Okay, that's a good place to leave it. And I would certainly also add that everybody who's listening and everybody they can tell should go to the website secretingredientsmovie.com and spread the awareness of that movie, make donations to it so it can happen sooner, and lead by example. Do exactly what Jeffrey just said and see what happens to your family. It should be exciting.
Thank you so much, and safe eating, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for being with us, Jeffrey. I hope we'll talk to you again soon.
You're welcome.
Fiery sunsets in our eyes, stars like glitter fill the sky. Beautiful, so wonderful. It's a beauty to be the love in this world. The height of mountains, depth of seas, all of life's diversity. Beautiful.
That was Love Rain Band, Greater Purpose. Their website is loverainband.com. Visit our website at lostartsradio.com for Richard's weekly focus articles, as well as lots of other free educational resources on important issues such as geoengineering, fluoride, GMOs, vaccines, natural health, cell phone and Wi-Fi dangers, and more. We also have links to all the great independent musicians whose music we feature on Lost Arts Radio. Richard is also featured as the Essene teacher on the libertybeacon.com. Go there for his articles and audio recordings. And now back to Richard.
Thank you, Doug. We had a lot of interesting points brought up by Jeffrey Smith, and I'm really appreciative that he gave us the time. He's incredibly busy under great demand, being one of the main leaders in this whole effort to get GMOs out of the food supply. I thought just a few of his really interesting comments that struck me, one of which is that he was talking to somebody or talking about somebody within the management levels of one of the biotech companies, probably Monsanto, and instructing somebody who just got into working with him, saying, basically, we're here to make money. And I think this is a clue. If you're trying to see where all this comes from, it's not just in the biotech industry, it's in many industries right now that they're doing things that basically destroy human life, destroy the biosphere, destroy the planet, and it's all to make money at those levels. I think above that, at the top levels of the power structure, it's completely not about money. There are other agendas that have been published thinking the public will never read them. It's about total control, total surveillance, and ultimate radical population reduction and destruction, basically. That's openly the purpose. But in the middle levels, where the millions of servants are located in companies like biotech companies that carry out, the wishes of the top of the power structure in terms of their destructive agendas, there it is about money. And I don't believe at all that money is something evil. Money can do fantastic good, and I would like to see money connected with all the good guys in these issues. But there has to be some kind of a requirement that all of us put on ourselves, not, whether you can get caught for something or not, but internally that there's a deep law of nature that's existed way before any philosophy or religion was ever thought of, that says whatever we do to someone else or for them comes back to us multiplied. And I think that's always been the case as long as there have been humans on Earth. And that should be the main reason that, we want to make as much money as we can for all the things that we'd like to accomplish and have and do. But we have to direct ourselves in a way that we really watch what we're doing to make that money and make sure that it's constructive. Other things that I thought were important about his talk is that it's very hopeful that more and more people are becoming aware that it actually matters what you eat in your food as far as your health goes, and we've gotten information from the medical industry for a long time that it really makes no difference. Eat all the food groups, everything you want, eat junk food, it doesn't matter what they used to call a balanced diet. And they keep saying all of these new, synthetic foods and the margarines and the trans fats and all the, foods that are mostly sugar. These are all fine for you. People are realizing that may not be entirely accurate and starting to become aware that when you're existing inside of a physical body, absolutely everything that you put in your mouth, eat, drink, breathe, and actually even what we think, which turns on and off genes in a flash, these are all critical, and it doesn't mean you have to worry about it at all or be afraid about it. It just means that you have to pay attention and just in a relaxed, non-terrified manner, just don't eat anything that's bad for you. It's really pretty simple. And I think, that was the encouraging part of what Jeffrey was saying, is that as people become more aware that it matters what you eat, and you don't want to eat, even if they didn't realize that GMOs are not hybridization and that they're completely destructive, the fact that they're sprayed with millions of tons of Roundup definitely means you should never eat any of them and never eat any ingredients in any food that has GMOs. But he also pointed out, which I think is incredibly important, that non-GMO foods, if they're not organic, can be flooded with Roundup at various stages. He called it a ripening agent, but it just means to kill the plant at the end, so it's more convenient to finish the harvesting process. It's not exactly like natural ripening. It's just Roundup normally kills anything green, and that's why the Roundup Ready seeds are such a huge breakthrough, because it produces a growing plant that Roundup actually doesn't kill. So, and this is the whole marketing idea. So you don't want to eat plants that are sprayed with Roundup. Even the World Health Organization, for some strange reason, is being forced to admit what I'm sure they knew for a long time, which is that it causes cancer. There must have been some total lack of choice for them to have to admit that to the public. But now that they have, even the people that consider them a legitimate authority, the WHO, have to come to the conclusion that anything that's sprayed with Roundup is inedible. It's not conventional in the honest sense of the word. It's poisoned. So that means the only way to be safe about that and to not be, getting, like drinking tiny bits of Roundup and pesticides and all these things in your food is to buy organic food. And if enough people do that, then, as Jeffrey said, farmers are economists, and like anybody else, paying attention to their business, they're trying to figure out how they can make their profit and keep going. And we want the organic option to be the most profitable for them, not growing so-called conventional or GMO foods. And as they do that, the prices get more in line with the poison foods, even, because if the organic foods are produced in enough quantity, and there are millions of small organic farms, which is also a basic element of real national security, way better than Homeland Security, is that produce things at home that have a stable structure and are totally healthy for the people. And so anybody that's thinking about even the possibility of getting into organic farming or even organic gardening, growing sprouts at home, anything like that, should be incredibly strongly encouraged, because everyone's life really depends on that transition. And even if GMO foods disappeared from the food supply tomorrow, which doesn't seem incredibly likely, we would have a problem, because we need a lot more organic food. I'm talking about real organic food, whether it's certified or not. That means that the soil is cared for with natural materials, high in minerals. If they're aware enough and informed, they use rock dust to improve the soil. And they don't spray anything synthetic or poisonous on it. They don't use chemical fertilizers. We need a huge renaissance in organic farming immediately to complement the effort to get rid of the GMOs, because real food is certainly needed. Now, we know at this point, the people that are paying attention, that organic food is not something super unusual or a new innovation at something. It's just normal food. And compared to GMOs and the chemical fertilizer raised food, it's spectacular, because nature is spectacular, and that's what we're designed to eat. And people are finding even beyond that the food that's not cooked, there were famous experiments done, which we may get time to talk about later, where cats were fed meat and milk, because cats are carnivores, and part of it was raw. Another group was fed partially cooked, and the other group was fed all cooked. And the one that was fed all cooked got terrible amounts of all the human diseases, just like dogs and cats do when they're fed not prepared, but commercial dog and cat food. So the organic food is way better for you to eat than the so-called conventional food, which has all the poisons in it, or certainly the GMO food. But above that, as much of the food as you can eat that's actually raw. We're going to have guests on next week that get into this more. It's going to be really interesting. The raw food is where the most nutrition is, no doubt whatsoever. But beyond raw food, we find that the foods that are growing by themselves through their own power and strength to survive on wild lands, these wild herbs that a lot of people call weeds, these have even far more nutrition than the organic foods that are raised on depleted soil. So we have a guest that I was really excited to have for this show named Katrina Blair, who started a great place called Turtle Lake Refuge that we're going to hear about a lot in the next discussion. And Katrina has done amazing work helping kids in school to start to learn how to use wild food, organic food, raw food. She's actually gotten some people in the city where she lives to change practices on the parks. We'll ask her about that. And is just one of the people that's really in touch with the beauty and harmony and health of nature and how to use it more effectively in our lives to stay healthier and have much higher energy and be more effective in whatever it is we want to do. So I'm really excited to have Katrina here, and let's go and talk to her, and then we'll go over some of these points again at the very end. I have a few other things to mention to you. So enjoy the talk with Katrina Blair. Here she is. So welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs broadcasting on Lost Arts Radio, and this is an exciting discussion we have ahead because we have our friend Katrina Blair with us, who's one of the people like Jeffrey Smith, whom I just finished talking to before the break. That's one of my heroes for healing the world. And I think, as I was saying before, these freedom-related shows, and ours is health and consciousness, but freedom is a primary health requirement to me. And a lot of times we just talk about what's wrong, and I like to have that, there be an antidote to that, to talk about some of the really spectacular, great people running around doing healing things in the world that you certainly wouldn't hear about on normal media channels. So we'll have a fun time going over some of what Katrina's doing. So welcome, Katrina. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let me tell you first my ulterior motives for this interview. What I've got in mind is that I want to expose and promote everything you're doing with your Turtle Lake Refuge project. And before we really get to that, just to give it some context, I want to go back to before you were doing that, as far as you want, and tell how your experience in history kind of led up to it, what made you do it, and then describe what the project is, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I guess we could start before I was born, which is with my mom. My mom's been a big force of directing me towards health. My dad, actually, also. But my mom had arthritis when she was 17, before I was born, and she went through 12 years of Western medical treatments and surgeries, and then when I was 2 years old, she got inspired to do a juice fast. Mm-hmm. And by just shifting her system to drinking juices, all the congestion that had been creating chronic pain really dissipated in about 4 days. And it was a huge epiphany of her waking up to, wow, what have I been missing this whole time?
That was a juice fast you said that did that?
Yeah, she just drank juices. Okay. And after even just 4 days, the congestion shifted so much her pain went away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a big moment in our family. And when I was 2, my earliest memory was coming home with this purple popsicle that was artificial flavored, and her telling me, that's not food, eat grape. So our family started a tradition of doing green juices twice a day. So before breakfast and before dinner, we would have a green juice. And, and that's just really kept my brother and I from ever getting sick. And we ate mostly fresh, living foods, and anyway, lots of orientation towards health from that point on. And then my dad, he introduced me to the wild at a really early age because he's a mountaineer and a climber. And so I was out when I was 11, I was out on this lake, floating on this lake with my brother and cousins, and they all turned back to have lunch. And I just kept paddling across the lake and all the way around and disappeared from sight. And these plants on the bank called me over, kind of beckoned me over, attracted me over. And I sat down amongst these plants and just got euphoric. And like the biggest high I'd ever experienced at 11. And the plant said, "You're home, and you're going to live your life with us." And it was just this very potent feeling that it still is with me today. Like, I still am guided by that. So I just fell in love with plants and wanted to learn everything I could about them. And right after high school, I decided to camp out for a summer up kind of in the hills outside of Durango, where I'm from. And I decided to eat all wild edibles that summer. And I did bring a little bit of food. I brought some cereal, like some buckwheat, sunflower seeds, and flax seeds that I would soak overnight for breakfast. But the rest of the time, I just ate wild roots and berries and greens and learned so much that first summer.
Wow.
And then really just continued on, got a degree in biology, and went on to get a master's in holistic health. And then started Turtle Lake Refuge after I came back from graduate school.
So what year was that when you started?
And that was in 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
17 years ago.
17 years ago, exactly. And Turtle Lake Refuge, our mission is to celebrate the connection between personal health and the wild lands. And I've been in love with wild plants, and I see all the wild plants equal. So I also noticed that some plants are getting a discriminating approach, like the weeds, and even are being, sprayed with herbicides and having the attitude of trying to eradicate them. And so that's been a focus of Turtle Lake Refuge. We have a wild food cafe, so we serve lunches every Tuesday and Friday, and we've been doing this for 17 years. And it's wild, locally grown and living foods cafe, and it's just a great place to come and meet people and get inspired. And there's a lot of community tables, and it's all by donation. And then how did the community people that are just coming for the first time, how do they deal with the wild foods? Do they fit in pretty quickly? It's been a process for sure. At first, it was kind of like, what am I doing? And people didn't know what I was doing either. But the more I've just stayed steady with it, it's become actually sought after. Yeah, so there's a pretty strong, like, consistent community that shows up, but then people come from actually all over to come to the cafe too. So it's been fun to meet people who make it a destination place. And it is really tasty food. We use the dandelions and we use all these different wild plants, but we make it good. We make it so it's enjoyable going down also.
Yeah,
beautiful.
So there's like a super nutrition aspect because it's wild, right? Because those plants are a lot hardier and in more mineralized soil than some of the ones in regular gardens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The wild weeds are brilliant in their ability to draw up concentrated amount of nutrients from even inhospitable soil. They just know how to survive. They're so vital in their resilience. And that very much gets translated into our bodies when we eat them. The brilliance and the minerals and the enzymes and the chlorophyll. It's actually, the scientific studies that show, let's say store-bought lettuce or even organically grown lettuce compared to wild lamb's quarter or dandelions, it's really a huge jump in nutrition from calcium to iron to all these different trace minerals.
Right. What about the wild type plants that they now sell in some of the natural food stores, like dandelions that you get in bunches? Are those good, or are they grown on crummy soil again? And so
Oh, I think they're going to be great. I think they're great. Yeah. Anyway, we can enjoy the wild foods, even if it's not always convenient to go out and harvest it, or we might not be able to find them. And so if they're available in other ways, I think that's great too.
Yeah.
It's very freeing to know that they're often very abundant around us, and they're free, when we just go outside and pick them. But anyways are great. Okay.
And I know a lot of the wild things like dandelions have pretty strong bitter taste, and that's a sign of something, right?
It is. It's a sign that all your organs are getting a good workout. There's the bitters they're tonifying for all of our inner organs, almost like doing a little bit of exercise. And in that process we detox, and the chlorophyll in the dandelions bind or chelate to the different toxins and then move it out of our system. So our whole body becomes more efficient.
Right,
And
so you're
therefore
actually getting detoxing at the same time as nutrition.
Exactly, yeah.
So when you were out in that summer just eating the wild plants, I'm assuming at that time you hadn't done any, tremendous study to categorize them intellectually and memorize them in books. So how did you deal with one of the first questions that would, I think, come up, which is differentiating between healthy, bitter and other tasting plants and any that might be toxic?
Well, back then, I was just beginning, and definitely I tuned into the plants a lot, but sometimes I would just pick a plant, and if I didn't know what it was, but I was maybe attracted to it, I would bike it into town where my parents live, and my mom and I would muscle test. So we would use kinesiology, where we'd put the plant in my hand and then test my muscle to see if it was strong for me.
Okay.
And if it was strong, I would eat it. If it was weak, I wouldn't. And then I would look it up and always confirm that it was accurate. But it was accurate to do it that way also.
So is there as much potential danger in toxic green plants as there is, in some areas like mushrooms, for example?
There are a few for sure. Like there's poison hemlock, which looks like parsley, has white flowers. So there's definitely some you got to be. It's almost when you're beginning the wild food journey, I highly recommend really starting with what you know and starting to eat just the basic things like dandelion and just some of these real simple ones that are easy to identify. And then the more you eat wild, the more your intuition comes alive. And then if you just study some of the few basic poisonous plants, okay, definitely stay away from things that look like this. And then there's this huge middle zone of a lot of things that are mostly edible, actually. There's only a few real toxic plants that you got to know, but most plants are not going to harm you. And luckily, our tongue tells us so much. And so it's really important when you're first starting a wild food journey that you go really slow and you taste things. Even if you know the plant, always reintroduce yourself to the plant and use your tongue, because the plant's characteristics change through age and through soil and, all these different factors. And it might be delicious at one stage, but really not delicious, or even potentially, not good for you at a different stage.
Right.
But your tongue will tell you. It'll either, say, yum, that's delicious, or, ooh, that's actually not that delicious.
Yeah, I mean, it's something a little bit more subtle than just whether it's bitter or not, right?
Yeah, it's almost, and how much do we want to eat? A lot of times with wild food, you don't need to eat very much because it's so potent. A little goes a long way. So, and your tongue will often say, oh, that's enough, I've had enough. Okay. It might just have been a couple bites, and that's plenty. Or
right.
If it's in a really lush place, you might eat a lot of it.
I mean, there must be plants that are toxic to animals, and you don't see them dying all over the forest from making mistakes. So, and they haven't read very many books that we know of, so they must have senses, and that means that we probably do too, that we've just not, remembered or we're tuned out of, and we need to get those back. Absolutely. Yeah, the senses come back, and the fine-tune qualities of, and this is where what I do when I'm out, I do a wild food walkabout each year where I don't bring any food and I take a long journey and just eat wild. And when I'm out there, I might find a plant that I haven't met before, and I would taste it, and there's so much information that comes across through whether it's bitter or astringent, it's like drying of the tongue, or whether it's deeply mineralizing or high proteins. There's these flavors that start to pick up, and as you progress, you start to tune into patterns with the plants, and then a lot of information gets shared. Even if you don't know the plant, you understand what it does for the body. Right. I mean, in a way, you're describing what used to be real science, because that was looking for patterns in what things were observed, and then, searching for ways to explain what the patterns are, and, somehow it's degenerated into just repeating acceptable points of view, but but we can get back to the real part whenever we want.
Yes, that's right, which is a very living science. Yeah, because so much information is just present tense. That's you and your unique body and that unique plant growing in that unique place.
When you do your walkabouts, what time of year and for how long?
Well, I've been doing walkabouts for many, many, many years, but recently, maybe for the last 8 or 9 years, I've chosen the longer one to go from Durango to Telluride for the Mushroom Festival. I teach at the Mushroom Festival.
Okay.
And so it's in August, like sort of the first couple weeks of August, and that's a really lush time of year to go out in Colorado.
Okay.
Lots of mushrooms and berries, and it's about anywhere from a week to 10 days, something like that.
So you're walking a lot of miles during that time?
Yeah, probably 90 to 100 miles.
Wow.
I mean, the one I just did this year was about, between 90 and 100 miles, and it took 6 or 7 days.
Wow, so you're going like 12 miles a day or something like that, or more?
8 mountain passes that I cross over to get there too, that go up to about 13,000 feet, some of them, and anyway, so it's a fun journey.
How do you
Lots
do
of elevation.
Thinner air?
Yeah, that's right.
That feels okay at the high altitude?
Feels so good.
Yeah.
And that's what I find is that I end up getting so much energy when I go out because I'm drinking the water and just sleeping out and walking and singing and making intentions and eating wild foods. Yeah.
The high altitude has a fantastic energy to it, but, as far as living there, you have to also be okay with winter, right?
Yes, there's lots of snow.
So how do you deal with trying to eat as close to your same wild and fresh and live food regimen during the time everything is frozen?
Well, the time that I start gathering is now, so it's fall and even in the summer. But I'd like to gather all the different wild weeds and different greens and dry them. And so then I'll powder them into a green powder. So that's just a great mineral supplement throughout the winter, and it helps me stay connected to the wild. And then I've been harvesting acorns and all kinds of different berries, and we also grow microgreens, so sunflower greens or pea shoots, buckwheat lettuce.
Okay.
And we grow that year-round, so that's just a nice way to have fresh things in the winter. And I also have a couple greenhouses that I grow year-round.
Okay. So it's the indoor things that allow you to keep eating live food all year.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have access to great produce in our health food store that comes from other places too. Right.
How do you experience the energy level of the greens and things that are grown under glass compared to outside?
They're more tender. Anything that's kind of been, I guess, babied, where we give it a little more, care or special environments. It's delicious, but it definitely doesn't have as much potency as the wild. So I just noticed that.
Yeah.
But it's nice to mix it up.
Okay, so one thing I want to make sure and hear about is other projects, and I think there's quite a few that are connected with Turtle Lake Refuge, right? I was looking at your site, turtlelakerefuge. Is it .com or .org?
It's .org.
.org, yeah. turtlelakerefuge.org. Everybody should read that and see what they're doing. But why don't you, since we've got some time, tell us about the other projects, where they came from and what they do and your involvement with them.
Great. Well, one project that we have going on is called Be Happy Lands, and that is where we are helping organically manage wild and public lands, and private lands too, actually. So this summer we were hired to manage 600 acres. Basically, their weed control, the old weed control that they did it before, they hired some people to go out on ATVs, drive around, and then spray herbicides, and that's the weed control. But they chose to take a big leap, and they hired us, and we do it on a very low-impact way, where we do it by foot, and we manually harvest the plants. And if they're clean, we'll actually use them. We'll dehydrate them, and we'll make teas, and we'll use the roots and dry them and all that. But we harvest them by hand, then we sprinkle other native seeds like grass seeds to help regenerate the land with other species. And then we also make a weed remedy where basically it's the roots or the seeds of the plants that they don't want there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll burn it into an ash and then dilute that ash in water and potentize it similar to a homeopathic remedy. Then we apply that to the land,
okay.
And that discourages the plants from being as abundant the following year.
That's almost like a biodynamic insect remedy, right?
It is. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I had no idea it would work on plants, but I guess the theory is that plants are just as conscious in their own way as insects, and they're going to respond for the same reasons that insects would want to be away from an area like that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So is this for the Forest Service that you're doing that 600 acres?
Well, the 600 acres was a privately owned lake club, but
okay.
I am approaching the Forest Service with a suggestion of how we can help them not spray, because they're still spraying into the pristine places, and that's really exciting to think of that changing.
Yeah, it's a nice way to...
Yeah,
I agree.
Right. So that's one of our projects, is just encouraging people to be organic land stewards, and we help out. And so, yeah, Be Happy Land.
Okay.
But we also have a wild food CSA. So CSA, we call it a community-supported abundance, but CSAs are a lot of times farms will have a weekly pickup of a box of veggies for their customers throughout the season. So we do the same thing, but it's with wild foods. And that's been a lot of fun. This is our 4th year of doing that, and really creative. We don't just give people a bag of weeds. We make dandelion pestos, and we make thistle root chai tea, and we'll use the wild greens and make kind of like a green chip. Anyway, as well as salad and dressings and all these things. So
sounds like that's something that would be good to spread all over the place.
Yeah, even if the CSA, the other farmers, integrated the wild weeds that they're harvesting out, rather than just discard them, to bring them into their produce, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't think the awareness of the high nutrition has spread very far yet. I think a lot of people have no idea that that's the case.
Yeah, it's definitely growing, but you're right. There's still plenty of room to share this information.
Okay, so the CSA, does that go all year?
No, this is just a summer project here in Durango. And then we also have some educational opportunities, and I'm just about to update the website. It'll probably be today or tomorrow.
Okay.
But we offer, we call it a Living Soil program. It's a 3-month course where we focus on permaculture and wild and medicinal edible foods, as well as living food recipes and locally grown, and then holistic health. So it's this whole theme of health for our own bodies and health for the earth. And then we do some field trips where we'll go on a river trip and a backcountry ski or snowshoe trip to a hut, as well as a wild food backpacking trip.
Wow.
And that is starting in February, and it goes for 3 months through April.
February. So you're going to go initially when it's still pretty cold, right?
Yeah, we're starting off in the early spring, and then we'll kind of come into spring, and then people will be all set to go into the growing season.
Yeah. So in the February part of it, are you actually finding wild food to eat during that trip?
Yeah, we will probably dig down and find some roots, and we'll definitely use overwintered berries and pine needles, but we'll also use a lot of the plants that we've already harvested too.
Okay. So you bring microgreens with you and things like that?
That's right, yeah.
All right. Okay, so what else are you doing? I know you've got a lot of projects going on there.
Yeah, well, we have a farm with honeybees and hundreds of fruit trees and greenhouses, and then we have the wild food cafe, and we do the farmers market, and we grow microgreens for all the public schools in Durango. So that's a year-round project that we deliver to restaurants and stores and schools. And then we harvest wild foods and make them into goodies like choke cherry macaroons or acorn nori chips. Anyway, these creative foods that we get into the health food stores.
So you're really making an impact on the diet of these kids, getting some new...
Yeah, that's right. And right now it's fun because it's apple season.
Mm-hmm.
We have tons of apples, and we have this hand crank apple press. So tomorrow we're going to go out apple picking, and then we press the juice, and then we dry the pulp and grind it into a sugar. It's just apples, but kind of concentrated dried, and it's really sweet, so it ends up being apple sugar.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah, we have lots of fun with all the abundance that's happening around us.
So I'm assuming you got the public school system to take advantage of your offering, and I'm wondering, were they totally receptive, or how was that getting them, to try it?
Yeah, that took about a year of meeting with all these different USDA people in the kitchen and nutritionists kind of with the school. And there was a group of us that were meeting. But at some point, someone had a great idea. We were just trying to get local food into the schools, and it was this, you have to have a $5 million insurance policy if you're able to do it,
what I was thinking. Right.
Which is a pretty big block. So, but someone realized that if we just offered it to them in a bulk way, not packaged, but bulk, then they took on the liability and we didn't have to.
Because they would be preparing it, you mean?
Exactly. And they'd have to wash it and all of this. So we, Turtle Lake Refuge, was able to get our microgreens as the first local food in the schools.
Wow.
And that was about 10 years ago.
Wow, that was good negotiation.
Yeah, sometimes just being patient, and then some fun thing opens up.
Yeah, exactly.
And that actually, if we're on the subject of projects, that's another similar theme with our organic parks in Durango. We had been working with the city to try to get an organic park, because all the city parks were previously sprayed with herbicides, and and same thing, we met with a bunch of different people over quite a bit of time, and then finally at the end of one of the meetings there was a suggestion, what if we just had one park, just a trial park, and they were willing to go for it. So Turtle Lake Refuge took on that park as the volunteer effort, and we had some weed harvesting parties, and we made compost tea and put that on there, and even put up a bat box. So they didn't spray that park for, what's that?
It's even getting community people involved in helping to maintain the parks, right? Not just specialist companies.
Exactly, right. That's an important part. Definitely the education and bringing people into it. So that was successful, and then we asked the next year for another park. They did. They gave us 2 parks. And then the third year we asked for more, and at that point they said, no, you people have a choice, and that's enough. And so then we decided that wasn't good enough for us, so we hooked up with a lawyer friend, and we wrote a city ordinance that stated we wanted all the parks to be organic overnight, and all the city lands and everything. It was it was exactly what we wanted, but it was very strict according to the current system. So there was a lot of conflict and theater around it. And we were probably on the front page of the paper for months, as it was approaching. And we put it on the ballot. We waited until we knew it would probably pass, because we waited till marijuana was also going to be on the ballot.
Okay.
And so between the two of those, all the liberals were going to come out and vote anyway. But the city knew this too, and at some point they just kept pleading for us to take it off, and we decided to negotiate with them. So we sat down with the city mayor and all the councilors, and we came up with a resolution that was more gradual. And so instead, and that ended up getting passed unanimously, but we shifted over a third of the park the next year, and then they hired an organic lawn care consultant to train the staff on how to do it well. And so anyway, that's still happening.
Okay.
Kind of an ongoing process, for sure.
So you were able to get rid of the chemical fertilizers on the lawn areas too, right?
Yes, no chemical fertilizers or herbicides on the designated organic parks.
Yeah, a lot of people don't really understand why it's not good enough to just get rid of weed killers and pesticides. Why don't you want chemical fertilizers, and it would be good to tell people the difference, you know.
Great. Yeah, so the herbicides, not only do they just kill the plants, but they also harm all the pollinators and the earthworms and any of the underground microorganisms. And actually the chemical fertilizers, they end up making the ground, the soil, very sterile because they provide these minerals, you know, these basic core nutrients for the plant. Then the plant soil is not fertile because when we put organic nutrients on it, it ends up bringing to life all the microorganisms under the soil that have this whole life cycle process of living and dying and digesting, and basically that makes really rich, fertile soil and creates nitrogen all on its own. But if we're applying these chemically made synthetic fertilizers, it doesn't encourage that kind of biological life under the ground. It makes it quite sterile, so there isn't that ongoing sustainable support for the plants. And then the plants, it's almost like they're on a drug, and they just have to be given it over and over and over again just to survive.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, the rain washes all these nitrates into the waterways, and that goes into the ocean, and then that's what's been creating these big dead zones in our oceans.
Right.
So there's a lot of problems to that.
Yeah, but fortunately, there's a great solution, right?
And the solution is let nature be as smart as it is. And really, when we step back and stop doing so much and we let nature step in and do what it does so well, things thrive.
Yeah. So I want to, in connection with that, I want to get your opinion on two other things that are related. One is that, you know, when you look at where those nutrients come from, almost all of them can be produced from sunlight, air, and water through photosynthesis and being captured and produced in the plant tissues, except earth minerals like, you know, calcium and iron and copper and zinc and all these different kinds of minerals that life in all forms needs, including people. And the only source of those minerals in the whole world is rocks. And so it turns out that it doesn't do any good unless it's in a very, very fine powder form.
Right.
Which is what happens during ice ages. And then when the glaciers recede, it gives mineral fertilizer to the world for another 15,000 years or so.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And when you're at the end of one of those interglacial periods and the powder form of the minerals is low, you know, then the plants can't really take advantage of the CO2 in the atmosphere and or start dying off and things like that. And it seems like a lot of that could be reversed if people found out about how to use rock dust.
Rock dust is very valuable.
Okay, so I just wanted to see if you agreed with that.
Yeah, it's very valuable. And there's different sources of how you can find it. You know, we have a local kind of a rock crushing place, and they end up getting dust, and you can just go and sort of sweep it off into buckets.
Well, so they don't even charge you for that then?
No, they don't.
Wow.
Yeah, and of course you can order it different places, but yeah, there's so many things we can do to help support the soil and the nutrients and the minerals. And it's interesting, with the wild weeds, they actually draw up a lot of these calciums and magnesiums and potassiums into the soil also, because they have deep tap roots that break up compaction, and then they draw up these minerals into their green leaves, and then the leaves get composted year after year and then provide it back into the soil.
Have you noticed by any chance, did you get a chance to see what a man named Paul Gauci is doing in Washington State?
No, I didn't get a chance to do that.
This is and I don't want to dominate the discussion at all here. I just want to kind of share some things with you to see what your feeling about them is.
Great.
And this one is really, I thought, incredibly exciting. That he had a place, he moved from Los Angeles up to, I think, northwest Washington State. And even though you think of that as a place where it rains constantly, he's in this little rain shadow area where it's pretty dry. And they drilled a well and got like half a gallon a minute, and everybody was really disappointed. And there was wildfire forest growing right next door, and all the trees were fine. And so what he got is that if there's a heavy enough mulch on the soil, then, the forest stays healthy without any digging. So
yes.
He got wood chips, not bark chips, but wood. 5 branches from a company that trimmed trees and just was looking for a place to dump the wood chips. And he spread those really deeply on the garden and planted things in lines, that he put the wood chips aside a little bit. And he found out that he could eliminate about 90% of the weed issue and almost all the watering. And the bottom edge of the wood chips became fertilizer.
Right.
He even had somebody come out and do soil tests, and it was way over what was needed.
That's such a simple way of gardening, is just adding deep mulch.
Right.
That's how we practice out here as well.
Okay, so you're not doing a lot of digging either, right?
Mm-mm. No, we just add as much mulch as possible, actually, and then either transplant them in, or if we're growing from seed, we'll pull the mulch away and plant, and then respread the mulch once the plants come up.
Yeah, exactly.
But it takes care of watering, reducing the water, and then it creates fertile soil when those wood chips break down.
And you don't have to eradicate the weeds, right? You can plant with them.
And if you want, if there's a real problem area, whether it's grass or Canadian thistle or something that's coming back so often, you can lay down cardboard first, and then the mulch, and that kind of just starts everything over, and you have just great ground to work with.
One thing that occurred to me during the talk with Jeffrey Smith is that if you were able to somehow get rid of genetically modified food overnight, then what would quickly become apparent is that the real food grown the way you're talking about is seriously in short supply right now. And if you were, put into some kind of position where you had to explain to the agriculture people of the country how to remedy the situation with the national food system and not let everyone starve, what do you think you would suggest or talk to them about?
Well, what's really quite exciting about eating wild foods, especially the wild weeds, is that they are in abundance around us often, and we may overlook them, but they're so potent that we don't have to eat that much of them to get the nutrition we need to survive. So there's a huge transition, of course, from standard American eating to wild food eating, and that transition is both mentally as well as physically. But when we really come down to it, these wild plants have so much packed nutrition, and they really are available for us. And so there's a huge amount of freedom in realizing that if the supermarkets weren't open one day, or a lot of the food that we're used to getting in a convenient way doesn't show up, if we know these wild plants that are growing around in the sidewalk cracks and in these disturbed areas, or just in our backyard, it makes us feel so much more secure, because we can survive. And a lot of these plants are complete proteins, such as the amaranth and lamb's quarter and dandelion. So they have all the essential amino acids we need to build proteins, and so there's a lot of hope out there with even just what's growing right now.
Okay, so this is, unfortunately, can't see you on video, so you can't point to your garden or anything, but because of what you just said, that it's so valuable if people get at least some knowledge of what is edible. You want to try to do a little bit of that by explaining, and then you can maybe refer to places where people could find pictures of what you're describing.
Sure. There's a secret right beneath your toes. From the ground is where the riches grows. Everywhere in the world where humans live is a free superpower that nature gives. You have 13 weeds from which to choose. Use your intuition and you can't lose. You are wise, so when you take a little bite, ask how much or how little to you feels right. Look, all of the wild animals know what to do. Eat your wild greens and join the zoo. So we could go into the 13 plants. I actually have a little ditty for each of them if we want to do that.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
do the whole thing if we can.
Okay. The whole of the dandelion is a wonderful food. A little bitter, little sweet puts you in the mood. Make your coffee from the roasted root and make sweet music from the singing flute. So the whole part of the dandelion is edible, and it's super common with the yellow flower. Even the seeds, when they go to seed, you can grab the fluff, and those seeds make a fantastic milk, or you can grind them up into flour or in your cereal. So the dandelion seeds are highly nutritious. And then there's mallow. Mallow is mellow and good for your skin. It's slimy and emulsifying. Grind the whole plant into a goo. It makes fabulous lotion and shampoo. So the wild mallow, which is Malva neglecta, but there's so many different varieties in the mallow family, including hollyhock and hibiscus. But the greens and the flowers and the seeds are all edible, and the roots. And so whether you just use the greens in your salad or your juice, or a lot of the Italian culture uses mallow in their tortellinis. Anyway, so it's a very delicious and mellow plant, and then has so many great qualities medicinally suited.
So are you saying that the cultivated hollyhock is in the mallow family, and that would be edible also?
That's right.
Okay.
And the hollyhocks are fun because they create such big leaves that I like to make burritos using the leaves. And then you put your avocado or whatever you want, your filling inside, whatever you want to put inside, and then roll it up, and that's a really nice tortilla.
Okay, neat.
But yeah, the hollyhocks are incredible.
With each one that you're describing and saying what's good about it, people can go online somewhere. Do you have a place that is recommended where they can check the picture and then have a way to recognize it?
Yeah, we have a wild food hunt. If you went to turtlelakerefuge.org, there is a place where you can click on a wild food hunt, and then all these plants come up, and you just click on the plant, and it'll take you to a video of us harvesting it and then making recipes with it.
Okay, perfect. So people should write down notes from what you're saying and then go to that part of your site and get familiar with what they look like, and then they can start hunting.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is probably the quickest, easiest, least expensive preparation thing that a person could do for food security.
That's right. It's so accessible to all of us.
Oh.
And what's fun about it is that it doesn't just help us survive, but it actually makes us thrive as humans. Like, we get so much more energy and find our own vitality. And
right. In fact, it's probably one of the best forms of nutritional supplements that you can imagine, right?
It's true. It really bypasses the need to take supplements.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, then there's lamb's quarter and amaranth. Guess which one makes the quinoa plant? Both these two are high in protein. Eat them for muscles like Mr. Clean. So the amaranth and the lamb's quarters create edible seeds, and lamb's quarter make quinoa, and the amaranth make amaranth seeds. Both of them have all 9 essential amino acids, making it a complete protein and really excellent nutrition. Both the greens, when they're younger especially, and then the seeds and the roots of the amaranth are a good vegetable too.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
And all the wild mustards with their petals of 4 are spicy and sweet, enough to make you want more. The flowers come in yellow, pink, purple, and white, and get your creative juices flowing into the night. So the whole mustard family is edible, and there's so many different varieties, hundreds and hundreds of different varieties. But the nice thing is, if you see 4 flower petals, and then you took a little taste and it was spicy like wasabi, then you knew that's an edible mustard, and you can eat as much as you want. Your tongue will tell you how much to eat, because sometimes they're really too spicy to eat too much of, or sometimes they're delicious.
Okay.
And then there's dock. Eat your dock greens when they're tender and sour, and grind the seeds to make your own flour. So the curly dock plant is, or it could also be called yellow dock. They have really delicious greens. They kind of taste like a lemony spinach when they're young and tender. And then as it gets older, it accumulates oxalic acids in it, and our tongue will tell us, ooh, not not now, or it'll basically tell us not to eat that plant because it ends up creating a little burny experience in the back of the throat. Just like if you ate really intense old chard, it kind of has that same experience.
Okay.
Anyway, but the dock greens are great. And then the seeds turn into a wild buckwheat, and you can grind up the seeds to make flour and bread. And then there's don't be afraid of the prickle of the thistle. Drink on the juice. It'll make you want to whistle. So the thistles are very alkaline, and you can make great green juice by picking them. Even though they're pokey, you can put them in your blender, add some water, apple, lemon, whatever you like, and then when you blend it up, you strain out all the prickles, and you've got this amazing alkaline juice. And that's really a key to health, is that if we can stay on the alkaline side of life, that's the regenerating chemistry for our bodies, where it knows how to rebuild muscles and tissues and heal and rebuild skin. And so by drinking these wild green juices, or any kind of green juices, it could be parsley and spinach, anything, but green juices on a daily basis, it really keeps us from getting sick. So then, let's see, we'll keep on going. There's all the clovers. The 3-leaf clovers have roots so deep, it pulls up minerals from 100 feet. When you eat these flower and leaves, it builds your bones and strengthens your teeth. So the clover family, whether it's alfalfa or red clover or white Dutch clover, they have an amazing amount of mineral quality to those plants, both the flowers and the leaves. And same thing, it's really important that we use our tongue to tell us how much to use. If it's too strong, then you don't want to eat it in a salad, and you might instead just make tea with it.
Okay.
And you'll still benefit from the plant. And all the wild grasses, but they're 8 amino acids. As a survival food, it could save your asses. So the whole grass family also has all the essential amino acids for complete proteins, and ends up being a great survival food, especially when it's young. And then as it goes to seed, all the seeds of the grass plants are edible too, such as any kind of grain, but they're more of a wild grain.
Right.
Yeah.
So all the wheat and corn and all those things are grassy, basically, right?
They're grass, it's right. Barley and rye, all of that, yeah.
Right.
And they've been hybridized to be bigger, but unfortunately, anytime humans get involved and start changing the seeds of the wild plants, it lowers its nutritional value. Even though it might get bigger and sweeter, the nutritional value gets diminished. And so when we go back to the wild, it's very potent in its integral nature.
Okay.
As we know. So let's see. Let's go to knotweed. Knotweed is a wild buckwheat. It grows low to the ground, and it's hard to see it. It's nutty and special indeed. The funny thing about it, it's not a weed. So knotweed is a polygonum. It's in that family, Polygonaceae, and it is also a wild buckwheat we can consider. But the whole plant is edible, and it's sometimes just overlooked and stepped on. It's hard to even see it. It's like a doormat plant, but ends up being highly nutritious. And if there's nothing else growing there, you'd often find knotweed growing, and that's a food we could survive on.
Okay.
And then there's chickweed. Chickweed is tasty and yummy and very, very good for your tummy. And there's purslane, is juicy and pretty, and it grows in the cracks of every single city. Purslane's amazing. It's a succulent that grows low to the ground. It's a ground cover and high in vitamin C. But even more than that, it actually is the highest vitamin A of any vegetable.
Wow.
And it also contains more omega-3 fatty acids than even fish. And purslane's a pretty common plant. Sometimes you'll find it at farmers markets, especially in other countries like Japan or Mexico, but sometimes locally in the United States too. But very tasty, succulent plant. And then there's plantain. If you need a first aid kit, plantain leaves and seeds are it. Chew the greens into a mash. It helps with bites and stings and rash. And plantain is really, like, every kid should know how to identify plantain because it's often growing in the schoolyards with the grass. And if they ever were to get stung by a bee or bit by a spider, they could go to that plant and chew it up and then put it directly on the bite, and it would draw out the toxins, take the pain away and take the swelling away. And of course, it's also edible and great for salads and juices, and quite good there too. Let's see. That might be about it. That might be the 13.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11. That's 13, yeah. So
Great.
What about if you're, like I'm in the Southwest, and a lot of the plants around here are really very tough shrubs. And what are the edible plants in a high desert area like that?
Well, there's the prickly pear cactus fruits,
Okay.
and there's the mesquite, mesquite that comes off the trees,
Mm-hmm.
and there's pinon nuts, and even the juniper berries.
Okay.
There's really so many, and tons of wild mustards
Yeah.
grow often in the desert too, and yeah.
So the first thing that probably everybody needs to know for transforming the food system is that we're not even recognizing most of the things that are food.
Yeah, that's right. We're not recognizing everything that's already growing as a natural wild garden around us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. When we start to open our eyes to the abundance around us, it's really liberating.
Yeah, that would mean that you could do things like go on your wild food walkabouts, and you don't
That's
have to
right.
think very much.
Yeah, where your pack is light. And yeah.
Wow. Well, let me think what else I wanted to ask you about, or if you think of other projects or aspects of what you're doing that we haven't really covered very much. I want people to know everything about what your project is involving here.
Yeah. Well, recently, since I've written, there's 2 books that are out. One is a local wildlife. And it's a recipe book, Turtle Lake Refuge's Recipes for Living Deep, and that's a fun book of wild food recipes. But then most recently, just within the year, I published with Chelsea Green Publishing Company a book called The Wild Wisdom of Weeds, and that's been fun because it's also allowed me to go and teach, and so I've been available for teaching different places on occasion, when I'm called, and sharing how to find these plants in person and how to make recipes with them in person. So that's been a lot of fun.
Right.
Doing a little bit of traveling since the book came out.
Okay, so do you have any of those coming up in other cities than where you live right now in the near?
Yeah, I actually have one in Prescott, Arizona on September 28th.
Okay, that's pretty soon.
Yeah, and that Happy Oasis is hosting that one at her place, Heaven on Earth.
Oh yeah, that sounds
in Prescott.
Right. Have you been there before?
Yeah, I have. It's been a while, but I have been there.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful place.
Yeah.
So what are you going to teach over there?
Well, we're going to go for a wild food walk and harvest our dinner and come back and make some recipes. And I'll probably show a slideshow of these plants first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, neat. Well...
And then I'll be teaching in California in Utah, in Moab, Utah, and then in California in November.
Okay. What part of California are you going to?
I'll be in Nevada City and then the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
The San Francisco Mycological Society has invited me to teach for their Woodlands Mushroom Camp.
Okay.
Up in Mendocino.
Okay.
And then also speak for the club in San Francisco.
How much do you know about the whole mushroom thing?
Oh, I love mushrooms. Yeah. Since I've been going up to the Mushroom Festival each year, my repertoire of mushrooms just keeps expanding. So when I go on my walkabouts, I eat mushrooms too. If I find really good choice edible ones that I like. I don't eat all of them raw, but the ones when I'm on my walkabout, there's certain mushrooms that I just really enjoy. I pick it and eat it right on the spot.
Yeah, so my impression is that's something that a person needs to learn from somebody that knows what they're doing. No,
absolutely.
That's not a good experimenting field, right?
No, it's not. You want to, there's some edible mushrooms that are really easy to identify, and you can start with those, and then you just slowly increase your repertoire of understanding. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And so if people want to find out about these various classes, they can probably go somewhere on your website to find out.
Yes, there is Katrina's speaking tours or whatever, information on that too. Yeah.
Okay, so you can't think of anything we really left out so far, huh?
Well, I think one thing I would just say is that, because we are what we eat, it's really exciting the more humans that are eating from their local landscape, because we end up becoming part of the landscape. When we're eating directly like that, whatever we're eating, the plants, let's just say a thistle plant, when we're ingesting the thistle, the flowers or the seeds or the roots or the greens, we become part thistle, because those cells are actually making up our bodies and our muscles, and there's this connection that happens where we become incredible caretakers of the earth, both because we want to, but also because we know how to, because the plants teach us from the inside out.
Right. I mean, it's almost like the mirror image opposite of what Jeffrey Smith would talk about, that the reason you don't want to eat GMO plants is that the genetics of them can actually interact with your own cells and change your body. So you're saying the same thing can happen in a positive way from the wild and live foods.
Exactly. And it's another step into like an ecstatic way of living, where when we witness wild animals, if we witness all the wild animals on planet Earth, they're all eating locally grown, wild, and living food. And so the more we can imitate how they live, we get that same core integrity of being wild human beings on Earth in a way that's very sustainable with our home and all other beings too.
It must have been kind of interesting to you going to a conventional, I assume conventional, college where you were getting your degree in biology and the things that you did there.
Well, I actually had a great experience because I went to Colorado College, and that college, we take one class at a time.
Okay.
So you just take one class for a month. And I was able to connect with this great biology professor who let me do all these independent studies. So I would just go to the woods for the whole month, study the plants, and then come back and write a paper. And I was able to do multiple independent studies as part of my degree.
Wow, that sounds like a school to recommend to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I wrote my senior project on the edible and medicinal plants of the San Juan Mountains.
Wow. Yeah, because you're bringing in an aspect that most of conventional science doesn't recognize, which has to do with consciousness.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing, is that the consciousness just comes into us the more wild food we eat and the more connection that it's developed. There's this expansion of an awareness of who we are that really reaches across not only just our own bodies but other species, and we become part of a bigger whole.
Yeah.
I mean, we already are that, but we become aware that we are that.
yeah, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So, you were saying in the very beginning, I think, that one of the things about your project is you said something about the connection between nature and the wild food and health, human health.
Yeah,
right?
Personal health and wild lands, right.
So I'm assuming that a lot of the people that come to visit or take part in your activities have various health things that they would like to see improved.
Yeah.
Don't you deal with that all the time?
Yeah.
And so what do you tell them don't worry, we're not talking about medical advice or anything. We know what is off limits here, but as far as, I think you're still allowed in this country to share experiences and observations. And so when people are out of balance and they have conditions that are making them not feel very good in their life, rather than just worried about putting a label on it and seeing what drug to take so you won't be aware of the symptoms, there's actually a whole different approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would be surprised if you're not having people wanting to talk to you about that all the time.
What's exciting is that when It doesn't matter if you have a cold, the common cold, all the way to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
When we give our bodies the optimal fuel, our bodies are so smart that they know how to heal themselves. And so one of the best ways is just to start with a green juice daily.
Mm-hmm.
That one thing is going to bring us back to that alkaline balance, and then we can heal very, very quickly. It's almost like we start shifting to more fresh things, more local things, more wild things, and really just kind of crowd out some of the other refined foods, certainly GMOs and
Mm-hmm.
non-organic things. But the more we just bring in these vital foods, the problems just disappear. They just go away.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fun not to have to label them, because
Right.
it's like there might be 16 million different, problems or diseases or whatever, but there's really one solution. It's just like going back to what nature gives us for free and how to be in harmony with.
Yeah. So you don't really have to cure anything if you feel fine.
That's right. Yeah. So it's empowering, and there's a certain amount of patience and trust that we develop along the way too.
Yeah, I think the trust thing is a huge aspect of feeling healthy on all levels, because right now most of us have been trained that we really need a whole team of experts to tell us everything that we need to do or not do, because every specialty has to be covered by some kind of authoritative expert to make sure that we don't do things wrong.
Yeah, and that's what my mom taught me at a really early age, and it was because of her experience with arthritis, where she was taking, all this medication and all these drugs and experiencing all the side effects, and then all she had to do was do a juice fast, and her pain went away. And so for her, one of the biggest lessons was she decided to be her own authority instead of give it away to a doctor or a specialist. I mean, they could give advice, but ultimately she had to tune in to what her body needed. And she taught my brother and I to be the master of our own health from that perspective, so that we know what's happening in our body because we tune in and we have communication with our own inner world.
Yeah.
And someone outside actually doesn't have that insight. They can study, but they don't know what's really happening as much as we do.
Yeah, I would really like to have people understand what you're saying there, because I think that's incredibly important. It covers everything, including your ability to know about wild foods and your ability to know what your body needs and what it's craving that's just coming from some addiction that you've taught it when you didn't know any better. And underneath that, the softer message you're getting from it of what it actually needs. And in the modern mentality, people might be thinking, tuning in, that sounds like some completely made up fantasy. What is that about? Could you explain that to a person that has no idea what you mean?
Well, when we tune in, it means we're going to get a little bit quiet. It might be a good idea to go and sit outside by yourself, where you can maybe connect with the earth or be in the sunshine, but have some quiet, fresh air time. And it could even be inside, but where you just have some quiet time. And I find myself breathing. I go into this in the book, but there was a thistle plant. I had an experience with a thistle plant, and it taught me how to breathe in a way that's very connected to really drawing energy from like the sky and the earth simultaneously filling up. But whatever breathing, centering practice you might have, to really center and get quiet, and then open, almost just continue to keep opening to, I guess, let's see if there's a word that wants to come out, but really being receptive and like a deep listening. And it could be even that you might consciously ask a question, or you might consciously ask for guidance around something specific. If there's like a problem with your body or you're feeling a symptom, you might just ask for guidance around, what's the guidance that my body wants to give me for healing it, and just relaxing and then opening, creating the space. And then I don't know how it works, but information comes, and I'm sure everyone has their own experience around that. We've all probably had experiences on some degree with this, but the more we do this, the more information comes and the more we're guided on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah, it's something that I really would like people to experience for themselves. And a lot of times they'll start out thinking, oh, this is really, something crazy and it's not based on reality, and it's this whatever they think of, new agey imagining things. And then 40 years later in their life, they've seen the results of kind of two-dimensional thinking that we're taught in the modern systems, and they realize there always was something much deeper, but they never paid attention to it. And it's a lot nicer if you can do that without waiting for the end of your life to start getting open to new ideas.
Well, yeah,
right.
Because then we get to really enjoy life. When we follow our intuition and our guidance, it's going to lead us into joyful ways of expressing ourselves and joyful situations. It's quite amazing how we get to be part of this really beautiful dance of life. That's such a give and exchange.
I want to hear about green juice. You mentioned that being really good for people in general. And if somebody is just hearing this term for the first time, how do they make green juice, and how do they use it if they can make it?
Okay. So green juice is probably the most important recipe, and it's really simple to make. I mean, if you want to, you certainly can just go outside and chew greens, or
Right.
just chew greens and drink water. That's probably the most simple way. But
Yeah.
but if you have a blender, that's a nice way, and you can pick your greens. It could be things from your garden, or things that you buy in the store, or things from the wild. And if it's from the wild, I always taste the plant before I make a green juice. Even if I've harvested that plant 100 times, I'm still going to taste that specific plant to make sure that it's not too concentrated or too, every plant is a little bit different. So I reintroduce myself to the specific plant in that moment. And if it feels like it's a yes, then I'll put some in. But with wild green juices, you don't need to use as much as you would from store-bought greens. So just a mindfulness of that. It's concentrated, more concentrated. But you put, let's just say, a handful of edible greens into the blender, and then you can just do it straight with just water, and you might fill the water up about half to 3/4 full with the blender, blend it up. Or you can add an apple or a lemon or ginger. And since everybody who's listening, your homework assignment is to do a green juice once a day, you want to make sure that you like it. So make sure that you might want to add something sweet So then you blend it up, and you can strain it if you want to. And certain plants I do strain, such as grass or thistle, or I grew up drinking comfrey juice. That was one of our main greens that we would drink all summer long, and then it would die back, and we would, use other things in the winter. But comfrey has little hairs, and so I like to strain comfrey sometimes too. But if you don't want to strain it, such as with mallow or dandelions or some of these greens that you would eat anyway, you don't have to strain it, and you can just make it a little bit more like a smoothie or drink the pulp.
Now, you're not talking about a regular blender, though, are you? Because that
I am, yeah. Just a cheap old austerizer from the hardware store. It works just great.
Okay, interesting.
You can also get ones that are more high-powered, but you don't have to have one like that.
Yeah, Vitamixes are pretty expensive, right?
Yeah, they're nice, but they're expensive. And, you can also juice in let's say, more of a concentrated juicer, these greens, too. That's another way. But I do find that drinking a more dilute tends to be easier for my body to handle and digest than if it's a concentrated shot.
So,
that's
in other words, if you make the juice, you should add some kind of good water to dilute.
That's right. I always add water to my concentrated juices.
All right. Yeah, because
a blender is just, more people have access to a blender.
Yeah.
And it's a real easy cleanup, so that's a great way to start.
Okay, and as long as you don't mind straining it, then the blender does what a juicer would do anyway, right?
Yeah, it works perfect, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the dilution, because without diluting, well, first of all, you have to blend it, I guess. But if it's too strong, then people want to start adding a lot of sweet stuff to it to make it more palatable, right?
And if you're going to add sweet stuff, I just recommend adding whole, fresh fruits or something rather than concentrated bottled juices. Those are cooked and not so great. So, just add an apple, or you could always add a banana or something like that.
Yeah, you mentioned an important little point there, and that's cooked versus raw. We haven't really said anything about that yet, and most people have most of their food cooked. So why is that not ideal?
So when we cook our foods, 100% of the enzymes get denatured. Really, a lot of the foods, if they're heated over 115 degrees, the enzymes are no longer active. And we need our enzymes. They're so beneficial for us when we eat our foods with enzymes, because then they end up doing the work of digesting and metabolizing, and they keep us young. Because if we eat cooked foods, more primarily, then we have to draw upon our own resources to do the digesting, and that actually ages us much quicker, and we don't have as much energy because we're spending so much time digesting and processing and actually detoxing. So a lot of times when we cook foods at high temperatures, the oils or the proteins get very denatured and they become toxic to us and less useful. So I just look outside and I notice everybody in nature is doing this, eating fresh. That's what I'm going to try to imitate as much as possible. So eating your foods when they're uncooked, you're also getting a really good water source from the food. Because when you cook a food, almost the first thing to go is the water gets evaporated, and then you have to find other water sources to hydrate. But if you eat your foods fresh, then you're getting all that good water right in the chemistry of the plant or the food itself.
Yeah, and so this aging thing that you mentioned is a really big deal as far as health and sickness goes, right? Because if you reverse what we call normal aging by taking away the stress of all the digestion of things that are not ideal for us to eat, then a lot of people will talk about the fact that age seems to go backwards.
It really does. It's funny. We can either be eating a food that is degenerating, and that would be GMOs or really highly refined processed foods, or foods that are just sort of status quo, and that might be good organic cooked foods, or regenerating foods, and those are the foods that are bioactively alive, such as the microgreens and the sprouts and the fresh living plants right off the earth, and berries picked off the bushes, things that are just so vital. Right. They actually help regenerate our cells and tissues and skin, and so it is actually bringing youth back to the body.
Yeah, so if a person kind of feels okay, or at least are used to how they feel, then they can start going through these levels kind of gradually, right? From what they're eating now to maybe stopping, don't eat any more stuff out of the packages with the long paragraphs of ingredients that are not
that's a good way to start.
pronounceable. And then get into Matt Monarch, he's, talked about the whole foods diet as kind of a step that makes a huge difference in itself. And then more raw stuff after that as much as you can. But if somebody's got a really serious condition, then it might be good for them to not take so long to go through those steps, right?
Yeah. I find that it's pretty consistent, about 3 or 4 days for making, it can take as long as you want, but really concentrated 3 or 4 days of getting through that transition period. And then after that, the body is like, okay, we're on to something new, let's readjust.
That's not very long, really.
And it's really not that long, and that's what my mom experienced. Well, it was just 4 days, and a radical change happened in just 4 days of shifting from your standard cooked diet and all these drugs to juicing.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, you want to say a few words about juice fasting and how you do that?
Yeah, well, I recommend bringing chlorophyll into the juices. So I don't recommend water fasting so much, and the reason is because there's so many petrochemicals that are oil-based that we're exposed to on a regular basis, that having greens, the chlorophyll helps bind to these toxins and gets them out of our system. And if we were just water fasting, there is that potential risk of them not getting out and getting redeposited. So I recommend using some greens in the fasting process. But basically, it's just there's so many different ways. There's just green juice. It could just be just green juice, or it can be greens and fruit juice. It's wise to focus mostly on greens and a little less of the fruit. The fruit keeps our pancreas alive and can kind of keep us craving, where the greens tend to just quiet everything down, and they do such good detoxing. Right. But really, there's also ways where you can just simplify and just go and eat all raw food, just fresh fruits and vegetables, and that's a kind of fast. And if you're going from kind of a lot of cooked, refined foods, I find that it's wiser to just go to all raw foods and eat as much as you want and chew, and rather than just go into a fast. It's more extreme, and then sometimes when you're done fasting, you just go right back to the craving of eating a lot of processed foods. So shifting in small steps is wise if you want to sustain a lifestyle change.
Right, and I think there's a lot of good raw food non-cookbooks available now, too, to make...
Oh, there's so many, yes. Right. Yeah, so many different great guides out there.
Yeah. It's very exciting. I mean, it all has to do with the ultimate foundation of actual freedom, because the more you understand how to... have things from nature that are not difficult to get, it automatically is freeing, like you said, and it gives you kind of an ecstatic energy that just comes from inside.
It does. That's right. Well said.
Okay, so what would you like people to come away with in terms of possible interaction with your website, things that you've written, actual visits to your place? Are you looking for more physical visitors? What would you like to leave with people for their, impressions when we're finished here?
Well, this upcoming course that's starting in February and goes through April, it's recommended that you take the whole 3 months, but even if you can't do that and you're just coming through Durango and want to visit for a week and take part, we welcome drop-ins also. Okay. And so you can, if you do want to come through Durango, that's great. You can, touch in with what we're doing on an educational level. You're also welcome to volunteer with us. You can help make our wild food lunches, or if it's in the summertime, you can harvest with us.
Okay.
And then we certainly have our lunches. You can come and have lunch if you're coming through. But I also do travel, and so if there's a situation that you wanted to bring me to teach a group of people or at a conference or whatever, I'm also open. If I can, if it works out with the right timing and logistics, then that's another possibility too. Okay,
so they can call you about possibilities for that.
Yeah.
And you could teach a group right in their own town.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, well, it's incredibly exciting stuff. I hope it inspires people to try some new things and to realize they may not be as restricted in what they can do for themselves as they were imagining before. And there's all kinds of things that are possible. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing everything that you're doing, and it would be fun to get, occasional updates as you add new projects and progress to taking care of new parks and things like that.
Great. Yeah. Well, let's keep in touch.
Okay, sounds great. And hang on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right. So, anyway, you just got to meet Katrina Blair. I hope that you enjoyed that. And we'll take a look at her website at turtlelakerefuge.org and her books and her classes that she teaches all over. And she's going to California and other places. And just an inspiring person. And one of the reasons that I think that's true is connected with her attempting to explain what tuning in is. And it's something really different than we get in the world of modern science and higher education, of which I've gone through a lot myself. So I know the difference between what's done in the current higher education system and what Katrina was talking about in tuning into various wild plants and things that are in nature. And she mentioned a good point that wild animals, whereas, we've been taught that, well, all animals have is instinct and they don't have our, intellectual brilliance. They just do what they're programmed to do. But that's not exactly accurate because, for example, with GMOs, like we were talking about with Jeffrey Smith, there have been experiments described in some of his books and lectures where various kinds of animals would choose non-GMO seeds or non-GMO plants to eat if they're given a choice, which I think is really interesting. They don't seem to be doing that by intellectual, writing down a list of pros and cons in their minds of, well, if I eat this one, over a long period of time, I'm going to get organ failure, but I like how it tastes, or, they don't try to approach things like that to understand how we do through our educated process. They just look at something, tune into it, as Katrina was trying to describe, and they get information immediately and they know what to do. We're not totally cut off from that kind of input if we learn how to reconnect to it. So I was looking at that compared to what we learn in the higher education, as I said. And in there, a lot of times, what it really boils down to, if you can strip away the facade of being very impressive with being taught with people with multiple degrees and all these things, that a lot of times it's just a generational memorizing of things over and over again. And people go through these educational programs and they memorize what's supposed to be true, and then they tell other people, and those people memorize it. None of them actually know it. So, in health sciences, which I've been involved in, people are taught, for example, we've done a lot of shows recently on vaccination, and they're taught vaccines save millions of lives, and they're the highest achievement of modern medicine and science. And then the next generation gets taught that, and they memorize the same thing. And they don't really have any idea whether it's true, and they don't realize they don't. And it's not just about medical things, it's about history. The educational material in schools is being changed intentionally so that the people ruling the world right now, including this country, won't have to worry about the fact that they're not doing what the country was set up to do. So they take out references in history to detailed stories about the founders of the country and the fact that the country was supposed to be based on individual freedom, with government's purpose being to protect individual freedom and to keep laws very simple and all this stuff. They don't want us to remember any of that. So what happens a lot in higher education is that all of that gets lost, and what gets trained is preparing you to go work somewhere, school to work, and they've called it a lot of other things. It's actually connected deeply with Agenda 21, which we've talked about recently as well. But they also, in a technical and scientific way, teach you to have what they call specialized knowledge, and especially in these advanced programs in, biology and chemistry and pathology and different parts of medical science. The specialty gets so narrow that it becomes very difficult to actually understand the wider impacts on society of what it is you get trained to do. Nuclear scientists, for example, that are experts in certain aspects of nuclear power may feel, that like they're really on top of it by just knowing all the thousands of technical details they need to help produce nuclear power, but they miss the super obvious, factors that show anybody with common sense remaining that nuclear power is totally insane to put in anywhere in the world. And the only people that really can't understand that is the ones with the most higher education, that they've become so specialized. And it's just the opposite of what Katrina was talking about, where if your mind gets quiet, but you're not falling asleep or kind of zoning out or anything, you're getting very still in your mind and very wide awake. These are the aspects of what people refer to as meditation, but used in everyday waking life all through the day. If you learn how to activate that state of mind, you get all kinds of amazing input, and it's not crazy imagination. It's really direct input from things that are going on around you and also within you. And those should not just be brushed aside. There's some really deep understanding that is possible to connect to that way. So instead of the need for, armies of experts to tell us what to do, and the whole, what I call paradigm of thought of the kind of out of touch aspect of modern science, is that you need a different aspect to tell you what to do in each part of your life. So they can tell you, for example, that toxic drugs are what's going to make you healthy, toxic chemicals. All you have to do is take them. And when you can't feel what was wrong with you anymore, then it must have been good for you. No one with common sense would ever fall for that, because real medicine, as Hippocrates talked about, never had any bad side effects ever. So, we're so out of touch and with the power issue. And, of course, part of the problem is that many people have discovered free and clean energy sources that work just fine and could be adapted to take over quite quickly, way beyond solar and wind energies. And those technologies have been bought off by government and hidden or used secretly. And the inventors that wouldn't agree to it have just been killed. So, there is a little bit of a challenge of figuring out how to proliferate things that really make sense. But the beginning is just quieting the mind down and becoming very attentive and receptive to very subtle signals from inside us and outside us, and learning again, since we've lost that connection, how to interpret those accurately. Everybody has that ability. So, and if you start with totally redoing your body, cleaning it out, getting rid of the signs of old age that you don't need, getting your energy levels back, starting with learning what to eat for various effects, as both of our guests were talking about in their own ways today. And these things have such incredible potential that you can use them for a start, and it tends to lead to everything else, and it gets pretty exciting. So thanks for being with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed both of our guests, and I look forward to meeting you next week. We've got some incredible stuff that we're going to get into with live food and other things. Have a great week, and talk to you then.